Chapter 691. Mr. Bai compared the interference value of the psychic wave network and repeatedly sized up Luo Nan's state. In the end, he let out a long breath and took back the wristband from Luo Nan's ear. He returned it to He Yuan and made an okay gesture. More or less. I can basically confirm that he has left the REM phase. Although his brain is still active, the order is increasing. He can wake up at any time. His face looks quite red? It should be the remnants of the dream stimulation. It might even be a wet dream. Mr. Bai casually joked. Zhang Yingying curled her lips, but He Yuan didn't respond at all. She just hung up the wristband. Mr. Bai actually wanted to communicate with Gym Master Xiu, but he didn't expect He Yuan to just hang up without saying any polite words. At this time, He Yuan lightly touched her ear. It looked like she was communicating on the psychic wave network. President Ouyang. Everyone in the room raised their eyebrows when they heard the name from her mouth. As for He Yuan, she nodded slightly toward Mr. Bai after listening to a few more words. She shared the communication with him. Mr. Bai walked away from Luo Nan's side and paced around the room. Ouyang, what's up? You're currently treating Luo Nan. Is the situation okay? Yes. It's quite optimistic. He already has clear and distinct consciousness activity. The order of the interference of soul strength has stabilized. What level is his consciousness activity at? The abyssal region? I'm not sure about that. How am I supposed to follow him? How about this, old Bai? If it's possible, wake Luo Nan up as soon as possible. He can accept some negative effects. Mr. Bai subconsciously turned his head and cast his gaze toward Luo Nan on the sofa. What's the meaning of this? Ouyang Chen's grave voice transmitted over. The branch sent a notice. I think headquarters will send it out soon. There are abnormal movements on the level of the polar domain. According to the reports of many extraordinaries in different regions of the world, their light senses are rapidly increasing. The subsequent effects will likely affect the abyssal region. Therefore, for the sake of safety, all activities in the abyssal region are prohibited for a period of time to avoid risks. Hold on. What's the meaning of this? Mr. Bai was a veteran ability user, but he was still confused when he heard this. We'll talk about the specifics later. Take care of Luo Nan for now. Wake him up no matter what. Prevent his consciousness from lingering in the abyssal region. We have a meeting at Shangding at 5 in the morning. Remember to attend. While Mr. Bai was still in the process of understanding, He Yuan and Ouyang Chen were already discussing specific matters. The scope of the notice needs to be expanded. In the past, it was enough to go down to the architect level, but now the situation is more complicated. Without a doubt, this referred to the fortress that Luo Nan had created. Ever since it floated in the abyss region, there would be at least a few hundred people and at most 1,000 sightseeing groups every day. This was not just for show. Ouyang Chen sighed. Everything has its pros and cons. No matter what, let's inform them first. He Yuan confirmed a few more key points and issued the relevant notices before ending the call. In the blink of an eye, everyone was a little distracted. Judging from their expressions and actions, they should have received the notice from the branch. What the hell is this notice? The polar region is glowing, so activities in the abyss region are prohibited? Zhang Yingying was confused. In fact, for someone like her who had yet to reach B rank and was not a psychic, it was indeed a little difficult for her to understand the logic behind it. Zhang Yingying was fine. At the very least, she was experienced and knowledgeable. She knew the severity of the matter. She said it, but she would certainly pay attention to it in her heart. But for the other people of the Xia City branch, especially those who were unruly, rebellious and curious fellows, the results of this notice might not be ideal. Of course, if they could control the forward operating base, the fortress and block off the exit, things would be much easier. He Yuan pondered in her heart. Her gaze subconsciously turned to the sofa, but it just so happened that she collided with a pair of pupils that seemed to carry bloodshot cracks. Mr. Luo. Xia City was bound to be extremely busy tonight. From small events like the New Year's Eve to large events like the aberration infection, and now a brand new polar domain light event had appeared. The event itself was bound to be sensed or understood by the vast majority of people. But correspondingly, the pressure it formed was hard to find a channel to vent and transmit. Even Ouyang Chen felt mentally and physically exhausted after being immersed in it for a long time. The notice was sent quickly, but it was a very tiring matter to receive definite feedback from ability users who were used to being lazy and free. Especially after the appearance of the Abyss Region Fortress, the special circumstances that Xia City faced increased the difficulty. He only had the opportunity to catch his breath when it was almost 4:30. There was still half an hour before the briefing. He stole a bit of leisure time and walked in front of the French window. The view from the floor of the Xia City branch was quite bad, but tonight was quite a coincidence. When Ouyang Chen's gaze passed through the shadows of the surrounding buildings, he just so happened to see the crescent moon hanging in the eastern half of the sky. Tonight's moon seemed to be dyed with a layer of blood. It was as if the blood had seeped down from the polar domain. Not only did it smear the moon, it smeared everyone's eyes. How dazzling. An electric wheelchair came over from the corridor accompanied by a sigh. Old Yu sat on it with a blanket draped over his knees. There was still a bit of smoke on the blanket that had yet to dissipate. His originally loose eyelids drooped down as if he could fall asleep at any moment. Old Yu, did you take the opportunity to burn a turtle shell and take a look? Nope. I just smoked a cigarette and experienced the feeling of the past. Old Yu patted the blanket and swept away the non-existent ash. He chuckled, what a pity. It doesn't feel right no matter how I try it. It's not a problem with the smoke. The color of the light and the feeling are quite different from the past. The two of them had already exchanged relevant information. Ouyang Chen didn't plan on tormenting himself again. He laughed and said, Old Yu, it's nearly impossible to find someone like you who has personally experienced the light of the polar domain twice. Don't say that. Gong Chi made quite a bit of a joke back in the day. Of course, I wasn't much better than him. Now that his soul has left his body and he's gone missing. But who knows where he's pondering this matter in some corner. You're pondering it too. I admit to these words. I didn't understand it back in the day. When you extraordinaries came out, I thought I could put it in your category. But now that this has happened, I can't compare. I can't compare at all. Old Yu gazed at the crescent moon and sighed with sorrow. He asked in the end, what does the martial monarch think? I just contacted her. She's driving for a drive and she's going to see an old friend on the way. She won't be participating in the briefing. Old Yu didn't find it strange. He just sighed again. She's so calm and collected. I can't even be envious of her. What about Deep Blue? Did the Apocalypse Laboratory say anything? Over there. In the end, the moonlight of Xia City couldn't shine on the other side of the ocean. While Ouyang Chen and Old Yu were talking about Deep Blue in the Apocalypse Laboratory, an emergency video conference was being held in the Deep Blue world. The topic of discussion was none other than the light of the polar domain. However, compared to Ouyang Chen and Old Yu, the information they received was more comprehensive and more mysterious. Xiong Gumao confirmed at Ceres base that he felt the polar domain's luminosity rapidly increase. I've already consulted Europa's preliminary base. Commander Joseph confirmed that he felt the light of the polar domain phenomenon. 800 million kilometers. Wang Yu rubbed her cheeks and tried to change her expression. Oh, there's also the Deep Blue world. Thank you to the 4 extraordinaires who attended the conference at the last minute. The information provided by everyone has allowed us to confirm that the so-called light of the polar domain really does have the property of being unfathomable. The 4 extraordinaires who were located in different regions of the Deep Blue world and engaged in exploratory activities projected their images into the conference center. They were either smiling or indifferent, but all of them maintained a strong curiosity towards the series of information. Wang Yu maintained a proper posture and tone. The biggest news in the world this year has been released. However, forgive me for being a commoner. I really have no way of personally experiencing what the light of the polar domain phenomenon is like. I can only seek help from literature. There's only one relevant document that records a similar situation that occurred more than 40 years ago at the beginning of the era of distortion. I've already sent the relevant information to everyone. Everyone can compare it and give your opinion. The 4 extraordinaires who attended the conference were all rather interested in this information. They immediately flipped through it. However, this action didn't last for more than 2 seconds. They practically froze at the same time. Wang Yu's senses were very sharp. He noticed this detail. What's wrong? Someone answered him, it's dark over at the polar domain. The luminosity has weakened? No, it seems like something is covering it. What the hell? Even the person who spoke could not stand this absurd feeling. He wished he could deny it on the spot. Wang Yu, on the other hand, was more rational. His gaze swept across the extraordinaires in succession. Some paid attention to him, some ignored him, but the answers he obtained were more or less the same. In the end, Wang Yu turned to the region of Deep Blue's investors and controllers and locked onto his target. His gaze came into contact with a very young and trendy person. His hair seemed to be dyed a color similar to steel blue, and his skin was so white that it glowed. This combined to form a very strange overall hue, giving his relatively ordinary facial contours a peculiar charm. Professor Li Wei, what's your opinion? I won't express my opinion on matters that I can't accurately understand. Guessing makes one superficial, and describing reveals one's incompetence. Rather than exposing one's shortcomings, it's better to observe. His harsh words attracted the unfriendly gazes of several extraordinaires, but surprisingly no one flipped the table in anger. As the convener and host of the conference, Wang Yu maintained a good attitude. He calmly smiled and said, "People always have to choose the right from the wrong. Forgive me for saying a few laymen, but light always has a source. Where is the source of the light of the polar domain phenomenon? Can you locate it? The cover, just now, was the light source blocked?" Chapter 692. The briefing conference convened at the Shangding building was about to begin. Most of the architect-level powerhouses in Xia City were present at the conference. The conference had yet to officially begin, but the latest situation in the polar domain had already changed. It was unknown how many people's heads were stuffed with the absurd reality of darkness and light. What had originally been a private conversation between Ouyang Qin and Old Yu had already turned into a large discussion with many people participating. The chatter was endless and everyone had their own opinions. The discussion only came to an end when He Yuan and her group rushed back from Aurora Cloud City. Gao Ming was the first to cry out when he saw He Yuan and the others push open the door and enter. "Hey, where's Boss Luo?" Gao Ming had been happily cooperating with Luo Nan for many days now. In his mind, Luo Nan was a super genius that appeared once in 100 years. Therefore, he wanted to know Luo Nan's opinion on this matter. But He Yuan and Bamboo Pole were the only ones who came. The most important thing was that Luo Nan was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Bai was also nowhere to be seen. Mr. Luo's grandfather is critically ill. The hospital has already issued a notice of critical illness. He has already rushed over. Mr. Bai is an expert in soul science and related pathology, so he has gone to help as well. Gao Ming went, "Oh my," but he was unable to say anything else. He Yuan looked around and discovered that people were missing. Her Majesty Empress Wu isn't here? Naturally, Ouyang Qin was the one to explain this. Gao Ming was a straightforward person. He clapped his hands and said, "This is great. The two people who are most likely to have fantastic ideas aren't here. Let's just stare at the information and make blind guesses." The people present were all used to this. They didn't mind hearing this. They just roared with laughter. There were currently a total of 10 people in the conference room, and there were a total of 15 people who were above the architect rank in Xia City. Aside from Her Majesty Empress Wu, Luo Nan, and Mr. Bai, there were also the Horned Demons and Cragburst who were currently wandering in the wilderness. And so, everyone was present. But when Ouyang Qin saw the ratio of the fleshly side to the mental side in the conference room, he could only agree with Gao Ming's explanation. He spoke in a chatty tone. "I'll explain the matter first. Then everyone can discuss it." Anhai Sanatorium was located in the outskirts of Xia City. It was early in the morning, but there were parts of the emergency center upstairs that were brightly lit. Emergency treatment was being carried out for an elderly patient who was at high risk. At this hour, the recuperation center was spacious and empty. There was almost no one around and most of the lights were off. There were only a few cars parked in the parking area below the emergency medical center. They belonged to the doctors and staff who were on duty who participated in the emergency treatment. In the meantime, there was a civilian version of the SUV, which also turned off its engine and quietly parked at the edge of the parking area. However, there was another person in the car. He was sitting in the driver's seat, holding a Coke cup in his left hand and a bucket of fried chicken in his right. He was munching away happily. In the meantime, an aircraft flew through the night sky and landed directly on the lawn next to the emergency center. A group of people hurriedly got off and ran into the building. The people in the car didn't even raise their heads, but they knew that it was Luo Yuandao's daughter's family. This high-speed aircraft was transferred through the branch's resources. However, this aircraft came directly from the Nader district, so Luo Nan wasn't on it. He needed to hurry over from the Pingjiang district on the other side of Xia City. Of course, Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts had arrived a long time ago. It was just that his thoughts were projected toward the emergency room. He didn't have the time to care about the cats and dogs in the corner. I, the one with the surname Jean, have fallen to the level of a cat and dog. Speaking of which, do you know that there's someone playing hide and seek in the emergency room? The driver with the surname Jean cracked a smile, revealing his sharp teeth and crushed bones and flesh. The rumbling of an engine came closer at this time. A flying car flew through the spacious hospital area at a speed of over 300 kilometers per hour. It finally braked and drifted, spinning as it stopped below the emergency center. The car hadn't even come to a complete stop when Luonan pushed open the car door and jumped out. He rushed onto the porch in 2 steps. By the time Mr. Bai got out of the car, Luonan had fallen nearly 20 meters behind. He saw that he was about to crash into the building, but his wristband vibrated at this time. Luonan instinctively assumed that it was his aunt at this time. He immediately connected. "I'm already here?" Shuelei's urgent and resonant voice poured into his ears. "Nanster, the gym master's old injuries have relapsed. He's being sent to the hospital right now. I've consulted with the branch. They recommended sending him to Anhai Sanatorium. They say that it's more convenient to treat him there. I remember that your grandfather is over there. Do you know him better?" Luonan stopped in his tracks in shock. "Gym master?" Luonan had just gone through a few rounds of baptism. His brain was a bit lacking for a time. He was stupefied on the spot, unable to come back to his senses for a long time. The windows of the civilian SUV in the parking area were tightly shut, and they were separated by 100 meters. But driver Jin's 5 senses and 6 senses were out of this world. He didn't miss a single bit of the corresponding unforeseen event. He began to chuckle, and his mouth chewed with even more gusto. Yep, he didn't have any evil intentions. He was just taking joy in Luonan's misfortune. In the end, Luonan still went inside. Soon, the emergency center's front building recovered its tranquility. Driver Jin finished off the chicken leg and cola in his hand. He let out a yawn and fell back. The car's AI considerately lowered the back of the chair for him, and he prepared to take a good nap. In the meantime, another rescue shuttle came over to transfer the patient. It was probably Gym Master Xiao. Driver Jin knew this person. He was a genius for being able to live this long due to the great collapse of the genetic plane. At the very least, Driver Jin could empathize with Gym Master Xiao. Driver Jin raised his eyelids, but he didn't completely open them in the end. He just spat out a stream of hot air from his nostrils. It seemed like he was sneering and sighing. Then the hospital area recovered its tranquility. But not long after, the sound of knocking on the car window rang out. A tall woman stood next to the passenger window. She wore the hospital's trademark white coat. The length was just right, but it appeared a bit loose. That fast. Driver Jin got up and opened the car door to let the woman get in. The smell of disinfectant assaulted their nostrils. It was hard to describe with words the smell of roast chicken that filled the car. "What are you wearing that for?" Driver Jin grumbled and opened the car window. The woman in the passenger seat snapped her fingers. Before the sound faded away, hundreds of millions of related odor molecules were gathered by some mysterious force and expelled from the car. Chauffeur Jin said lazily, "Your Majesty is awesome." Empress Wu didn't even bother to look at him. She just nodded forward, indicating for him to drive. Old Jin immediately started the car. The civilian SUV drew a short arc and drove toward the area where the light and shadows of the street lamps intersected. It quickly passed through the main gate and left the sanatorium behind. On the way, Driver Jin couldn't help but feel a bit curious. That old man Luo, after you gave him a breath of immortal qi, he should be able to hold on for another year and a half, right? Not necessarily. If he waves the cloak 2 more times like this, even if a god really descends, he won't be able to be saved. Wu Jiong took off his white coat unhurriedly, hooked a corner of it and let it out the window. The high-speed airflow blew the white coat up. If one didn't care about the details, it really did look like a cloak fluttering in the wind. "Hey, do you have any sense of civility? I can't care anymore." As he spoke, the white coat was blown away from his fingers and flew into the distance, quickly disappearing into the darkness. "Although it's already tattered and too heavy, I still hope that someone can catch it and buy us some time." "You're counting on his grandson?" "He, unreliable. If he jumps like this now, what will happen in the future? If it's that kid, if he's not as unlucky as you, I hope he jumps better and better. Even if he can't be a cloak, he can still be a shield. However, fate is ultimately uncontrollable. It's like a beam of light that escapes. Who knows if it will be annihilated and assimilated in the vast cosmos? Or will it safely arrive tens of thousands of light years away and be captured by someone?" Driver Jin curled his lips. "Let's use a woman's intuition to make a judgment." This is terrible. This is really terrible." Sheng Wu closed his eyes, and his brainwaves flowed in an orderly manner. His mechanical arm tapped on the virtual keyboard, and his personal diary and work diary were output at the same time. The content and direction of the two paragraphs were different, but they were smooth and natural. There were no signs of simultaneous operation. This was the basic operation of the School of Creation, and it was also the best way to test one's basic abilities. Jianghu keenly sensed that, compared to the output of his brainwaves, every action of the mechanical arm would have a delay of about 7/1000ths of a breath. One breath was the basic moment, which was 10e plus 44 times the minimum measurable time interval. Jianghu would never be able to reach the perceptual precision of the basic moment in his entire life, but for any advanced life form, refining the perceptual precision was a lifelong pursuit. Using breath, as the scale was too depraved. Even if it was reduced by 3 orders of magnitude, it would still be unforgivable on the battlefield. General Lone once said. Wait a minute, he was no longer on the battlefield, and he was no longer this single knight who charged at the outlands, but a retired officer who was sent to the reserves. He was the manager of the Stargate Infrastructure Management Office of U-1337, who had to spend all his time before retirement in this galaxy that even the outlands were too lazy to visit. A communication came in. This is Jianghu. Oldie. Okay, bring him here. Soon, his deputy Wuxia came to his office with the rookie of the management office, Xanti. Xanti was a standard rookie dumbass. This was not a bad comment. Under General Lone's command, he was associated with the element of serious and naive. He was a good piece of steel that could be beaten. The only thing that Jianghu hated was the little guy's mental attribute that had gone awry. Director Xing. Call me sir. Yes sir. Reserve Corporal Xanti reporting to you. In the outer region of the U-1337 galaxy, a Class 7 wave anomaly has appeared. Based on the Praeger effect, I have calculated the approximate relative position and sector. The young man had already sent the relevant information. Jianghu sized it up and murmured, 42 squares away, that's 42 days ago. Is there any follow-up? Sir, there is no follow-up. Also, sir, it should be 21 squares and 21 days. We have changed the standard units of the heavens to connect with the various systems of the divine kingdom. There was a moment of silence in the office, and then Jianghu said pleasantly, You are right, old habits have not been changed. Now, Corporal, you can follow the procedures and apply for a scout ball, the kind that can fly in hyperspace. Calculating at the highest speed, in about 5 Pantheon years later, before your 20th birthday, you will receive the most detailed results. Maybe by then you can receive a reward from the military before your contract ends. It's even better if it ends. You can change your career in time and become an explorer. According to the information, you can find a high-level life-gathering area and immediately become a billionaire. Oh no, it should be a new pattern for the God of Dawn's cloak. Now go do it, child, good luck. The dumbass left in a daze. Jianghu turned his eyes to his deputy. Wuxia raised his hand to say, It has nothing to do with me, and then ran out of the door. The standard units of the heavens, multiplied by 2 is the standard unit. It seems that the gods in the heavens are really cheap. Jianghu's voice was isolated in the office, but as his deputy, Wuxia could guess some of the content. But it had nothing to do with him. After leaving the door, Wuxia directly pulled a certain line. The relevant data is in hand. Traveling at high speed through hyperspace to the relevant sector, without a senior lord to oversee, driving the configuration will require a large team of at least 400 people. Recruiting now, we can set off in 4 standard weeks. At most 100 weeks later, we will have a definite result. Chapter 693. Cat Eyes had a dream. He dreamed that she was crawling on a large net made of long metal chains. The net was endless and extended into the depths of the void, with no end in sight. She didn't know where she was crawling, but she knew that there was a blazing sun in the center of the net, constantly radiating astonishing light and heat. The terrifying heat was transmitted through the long metal chain, burning her hands and feet. But it was not enough. It burned all the way through her skin, flesh, and bones, mixing the half-melted metal droplets with her body fluids, turning her into a part of this endless net. She struggled in fear, but she could not resist the momentum of the fusion. But at the same time, a vigorous sense of power rushed in wave after wave, pushing her consciousness to expand and expand, giving her an unprecedented sense of fulfillment and control. Afterwards, Cat Eyes vaguely remembered who the energy that was squeezing in had come from. This kind of forced giving and the complete loss of resistance made her inevitably have some subtle associations. It was like a gunpowder pinch. After a few sparks, the compressed gunpowder exploded with a bang. This was different from the external pressure. This was an impulse that originated from Cat Eyes herself. The explosion was not a destructive shockwave, but a poisonous fire that rapidly set a prairie ablaze. It burned through every corner of her body, both inside and out. Cat Eyes let out a hiss as she suddenly woke up with a start. Only then did she discover that her entire body had been soaked in bodily fluids. The poisonous flames that had scorched her body had turned into a warm and sticky sensation that was hard to distinguish. It was truly terrible. She looked at her watch. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, only 2 hours before she fell asleep. Cat Eyes sighed and extended her hand to scratch her scalp. Her long hair, which was already drenched in sweat, was scratched even more messily. There was no way she could sleep again tonight. She might as well take a shower to freshen herself up. Cat Eyes activated the Hexier while she was bathing. She prepared to send a few messages to relieve her boredom. However, as soon as he opened it, the whooshing sound of information notifications filled the air like locust-like arrows, making him feel as if thousands of arrows were piercing through his heart. The intelligent system of the psychic wave network thoughtfully picked out the common keywords and most of the information for her and categorized them accordingly. Ah, there's a bug in the fortress. Boss Luo, save me. Boss Luo, come out. Take off Boss Luo's bracelet to ensure your safety. Tear off Gao Tianshir's sticker to ensure your life is valuable. Boss Luo is going missing again. Where are the people from the project team? The first to be trapped is the project team. Winky face. Due to the fortress project in the Abyss region, the late spring night of Xia City experienced the fiery heat of summer ahead of time. Several hundred people were in a chaotic mess, alarming Gao Meng, Mr. White and other veteran B-rank powerhouses. They tossed and turned, but the most important figures had disappeared without a trace in the darkness of the night. The first time this happened, it was horrifying. The second time, it was painful. The third time, it was sullen. The fourth time, the fifth time, the sixth time, and even the countless times, it was completely numb. Cat Eyes entered the friend group established by Luo Nan. It clearly displayed that the group owner was not in the service area. However, most of the other group members were still awake. Bamboo Pole, who was currently trapped in the fortress, barely managed to send a voice transmission. His voice was full of resentment. Boss Luo got away again. What are you security guards doing? Hee, do I have to emphasize it again? Right now we live on as sparring partners. Qin Ikuin, who had already been relieved of his role as a bodyguard, was like a floating ghost. Shuelei, who always had a stable schedule, was woken up. He provided outdated information. In the afternoon he went to the sanatorium to see Grandpa Luo and the gym master. He even practiced Sanzhou with me. You didn't break his legs? Shuelei felt wronged. Right now he's most proficient in speed and control. The photoelectric leg and the illusory magnetic field are simply amazing. What a crappy name. It's not like I came up with it, Brother Papercut. Seeing that the topic was about to stray to the other side of the Pacific Ocean, the always calm Bamboo Pole was truly enraged. I'm about to be squeezed dry. Is this the time to discuss dogs' hit names? What happened next? Where did he go next? I asked Brother Red Fox. Naster trained with Brother Red Fox. Yes, he learned city tracking and anti-tracking techniques with me. We walked to the orphanage in the Forest Wall district on foot. We practiced midway, then I went back. Dean Wan? Oh, he's not in the group. Where's Dean Wan's eldest disciple? Little Xie? There's no need to ask. Last night, Luo Nan spent the night at Gear. He's been like this every day. Rui Wen even went to deliver food. Cat Eyes found an opportunity to cut into the conversation and provided the most valuable information. However, this was tantamount to selling Luo Nan out. Zhang Yingying sent a raging emoji. Then why can't I find him every time? This was because he would jump several thousand kilometers away. He was quite willful. Zhang Yingying was unable to obtain a satisfactory answer from Cat Eyes. She turned around and shouted at Red Fox, "To think that you call yourself Fox. He is a shut-in who never steps out of his house. Don't you have any idea why he is learning from you?" Red Fox replied with a disdainful emoji. It's more important to figure out Boss Luo's whereabouts. Papercut acted as a peacemaker, doing his best to bring the topic back to the topic. But as he spoke and spoke, he strayed a bit off topic. Speaking of which, I find it strange. No matter what, Boss Luo has nothing to do with shut-ins recently, right? What's going on with him? Has his body been taken over by someone? Cat Eyes sneered and replied, "Puberty has arrived. Hormones are being secreted in excess. He's already 17, big sis. Endocrine disorder. Fine. It doesn't matter what stage boss Luo has reached in puberty. Where in the world is he right now? There are over 100 people waiting for him to save. The matter helplessly returned to its original point. In the early morning hours of April 22, 2097, the tracking operation against the Fortress Project Team's chief consultant, Luo Nan, ultimately came to nothing. Everyone was unable to find Luo Nan in the end. The project team and a few experts in Xia City, who already had some understanding of configurations, worked together and finally solved the problem. There was no need to mention the misery involved. Cat Eyes watched the development of the situation with cold eyes. Her heart was unmoved. After all, there had been far too many people in the past few months. There had been far too many people who had been left in dire straits due to Luo Nan's willfulness. Especially those who urgently wished to obtain power from Luo Nan's body, from the sun behind Luo Nan. Yes, perhaps Luo Nan himself was included? Cat Eyes finally obtained the pleasure of rebalancing herself when she thought of this. D City. It was 4 hours earlier than Xia City. It was already early morning. D City was in the southern hemisphere. It was currently autumn and winter, so the seaside was cold and gloomy. There was a rocky beach near the seaside that was rarely visited by tourists. Yinlu stood on this rare piece of flat ground. She faced the sea and felt the strong sea breeze blowing against her face. She felt as though she was standing in front of a blast furnace that was burning steel. The air current that assaulted her face could carry high-temperature flames at any time. Common sense and reality. Simple sensations and complex high-level senses entangled with each other. They slowly mutated her perception, allowing her to gradually get used to this special environment until she became accustomed to it. She closed her eyes and the burning Blood Soul Temple appeared before her eyes. The solidified configuration of the Abyss region seemed to be very close to her. It could burn off her eyebrows and destroy her face at any time. Every stream of lava that flowed on it contained a high-temperature energy that was 10 times higher than before. The Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss region originally didn't have any substantial temperature to speak of. What it gathered was just the extremely paranoid emotions and thoughts of the believers. After going through a series of operations, they became a medicinal primer that mobilized the boundless energy of the Abyss region. But after going through a period of adjustment, these emotions converged into the stone forest and the lava lake to circulate and circulate. They were clearly bestowed with the direct killing power of burning the soul and flesh. This forced the higher-ups of the order to be more cautious than ever when they mobilized the relevant medicinal primer. Otherwise they might suffer a backlash. Of course, once the transfer was successful, the impact of the Abyss region storm would explosively increase. 4 months after New Year's Day, the Blood Flame Order had washed away its previous decline and quickly established a foothold in D City. This was largely due to this. Because of this, Jianghu and the other elders and higher-ups of the order were pleasantly surprised and conflicted. They endured this complicated and difficult change together. The one who did all of this was none other than Luo Nan. Mrs. Halder had not told anyone else about the matter of cooperating with Luo Nan other than her personal secretary. Jianghu and the others only knew that Mrs. Halder had found a professional consultant or investor. As for who it was, everyone had their own guesses. As for whether or not they guessed the correct answer, it didn't matter. After Elder Mo Luen passed away, Mrs. Halder had the final say in the matters of the Blood Flame Order. Even without Mrs. Halder's opinion, Luo Nan's flourishing career in D City over the past 4 months, as well as the more fundamental awakening of 16 devout believers and fanatical believers, had the persuasive power to sweep away everything. Every time Yinlu thought of this series of changes, she thought of the young man who had created this miracle with his own hands. She thought of his superb and immeasurable methods, and her heart felt heavy. It couldn't be considered a good feeling, but it was just like how her senses had already mutated. After a long time, all she had obtained were progress and benefits. It was hard to avoid her feelings becoming blurry. It was like being choked by someone experiencing the thrill of suffocation. When her thoughts and emotions reached this point, Yinlu suddenly became absent-minded. She took a deep breath of the sea breeze, unable to differentiate between hot and cold. It was also at this time that the undulating waves of the distant sea seemed to be patronized by the magma at the bottom of the sea. A large expanse of seawater suddenly boiled. Bubbles swelled and burst, rising and falling in succession. There was even a gurgling sound coming from that direction. Yinlu hurriedly collected her thoughts when she saw this abnormal situation. She picked up the special fireproof towel she had prepared to the side and moved forward. The waves of the sea pushed toward the shore one after another. The boiling region drew closer. leaving behind special traces of whirlpools on the surface of the sea. The light on the surface of the sea wasn't too bright in the early morning. She couldn't see the bottom of the sea with her naked eye. However, Yin Li's mental senses, which had improved quite a bit during this time, were already able to touch the extremely restless emotions that were 1,000 times hotter than the boiling seawater. Chapter 694. The one struggling in the water was Madame Halder. At this moment, the blood flame order's Lord Ablatum was no longer as calm as usual. She looked more like she was drowning. Her hands and feet twitched and she curled up and rolled. The bubbles that came out of her mouth and nose indicated that a large amount of seawater had entered her lungs. It was as if her life could be taken at any time. The surrounding seawater was boiling. Affected by the high temperature of Lady Halder's body, the seawater was constantly changing its form, going back and forth between liquid and gas. But at the same time, there was a coldness that never changed. It was like a prison, like a torture device. It constantly surrounded Mrs. Halder, lashing and torturing her, challenging her physical and psychological limits. In the depths of the ocean, Yin Li seemed to be able to see the silhouette of a youth directing and controlling the current situation, changing it in the direction that he wished. Yin Li didn't dare to take another look, nor did she dare to interfere. She could only stand stiffly by the shore. About 5 minutes later, the rising tide pushed the rising and falling bubbles, and also pushed a naked body to the shore. Purely from a visual point of view, this woman's body was mature, fit, and well-rounded. However, the most eye-catching thing was not her figure, but the heat radiating from her body, which seemed to be able to burn and distort the air. However, her skin was strangely pale, without the slightest hint of blood. Madam. Yin Li stepped on the seawater and ran forward. She draped a long scarf over the exhausted Mrs. Halder to cover her. Mrs. Halder was still in a daze. She lifted her eyelids and saw that it was Yin Li, but she didn't say anything. She curled up under the fireproof towel, her body still twitching. After another minute, her body gradually calmed down and she recovered a bit of her strength. The first thing she said was, "Mr. Luo, what do you think?" On the shoreline, part of the seawater that was pushed up by Lady Halder was still close to the boiling point. The corresponding water, light and steam, under the influence of an invisible force, spiraled up and down. In the time of 2 or 3 breaths, a blurry human figure was formed. The sea breeze blew, and the water vapor that formed the human figure fluctuated a few times. When it appeared again, it was already a relatively clear face of a young man. It was Luo Nan. He stood behind Lady Halder's curled body and looked down. He did not immediately respond. Although he didn't say it out loud, he wasn't completely unperturbed. Luo Nan had to admit, the woman in front of him was truly ruthless. She really did have the courage to break through the norm. Right now Madame Halder was very weak. She lay paralyzed on the rough rocky beach, practically motionless. Beneath the fireproof towel, cold sweat seeped out of her body before being dried by the high temperature. In such a physical condition, if it was a normal person, they would have died 800 times already. Only the body and soul structure of an ability user could withstand it. Even though she was in an incomparably sorry state, Madame Halder was in a completely different state of mind. In the depths of the lava lake in the stone forest of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District, boiling emotions and desires accumulated layer by layer, and even provoked the restless heat from the deep space of the polar domain, forming a destructive and extreme environment. The so-called lava was no longer enough to describe it. It was more like the core of a planet, always maintaining a high temperature and high pressure environment. For Yin Lu and the other higher-ups of the Blood Flame Order, this was a forbidden ground that they couldn't step into. Otherwise they would only die. However, in this forbidden zone of death, a bright light that was different from other emotions and desires was swimming in the chaotic and restless flames in an extremely intelligent manner. Every time there was a twist and a tremor, it revealed its ability to the fullest. It cut off all interference and it absolutely wouldn't converge with external objects. Such an intense contrast gave one a marvelous feeling. Every time the muddle-headed wraith sign saw this bright light, it would reveal its greedy, gluttonous nature. If Luo Nan hadn't restrained it, it would have long since charged over and gobbled it up. Perhaps it was due to the wraith sign's influence. Luo Nan had seen it many times and he felt that it had its own flavor. Naturally, Luo Nan felt a sense of respect for Madame Halder, who was able to nurture it, create it, and polish it. At the same time he felt an intense interest and curiosity. Luo Nan still didn't speak. He raised his arm and used this temporarily constructed hand of water vapor to touch the nape of Madame Halder's neck. This area was still exposed to the air. It looked pale and exquisite, but it contained a high temperature. Even Inla didn't dare to touch it directly. Luonan's half-incorporeal hand made contact, and a hissing sound rang out. The front part of the hand turned blurry and turned into steam. Then it was restrained by an incorporeal force, maintaining its approximate structure. It only conducted heat backward, and soon Luonan's body of water vapor began to evaporate. The undulating waves beneath Luonan's feet displayed its ability to conduct heat, and new seawater swirled up to replenish the heat. Not only did this temporarily constructed body not suffer any damage, the details became clearer and more discernible. Madame Halder and Inlu witnessed all of this. Inlu felt that Luonan's methods were brilliant, like magic, but Madame Halder saw many more things. From the configuration system that Luonan strongly promoted, she could see that this was a complex and vivid set of modules. It was constructed from different modules such as shaping, conducting heat, and so on. And under Luonan's will, fine adjustments could be made at any time. External resources and internal logic blended into one, forming a true invisible power. This was true control power. It was a high-end, highly efficient, and highly difficult method. Luonan could sense it from her body. Madame Halder closed her eyes. It really did feel like someone was touching the nape of her neck with a slightly cold finger. The two bodies made contact, bringing forth a numbing itch, a slight pain, and other complex and subtle sensations. She didn't mind this, just like how she didn't mind exposing her body in front of the opposite sex. But she wouldn't act as if she didn't care. She just maintained her natural posture under Luonan's touch, and she pondered the most crucial question. Several seconds later, she asked once more, "Is there something wrong?" Luonan finally spoke through telepathy. "The progress of strengthening the spinal nerves is much faster than expected. It's much stronger than I was back in the day. This is all thanks to the key to the container of formatting theory provided by Mr. Luo. It's not that bad. The blood flame order's body refinement technique is quite exquisite. Only by combining the two can there be this sort of effect. But even so, the strength of your fleshly body is still disproportionate when compared to a sharp blade that has been tempered 100 times. It's useless to have the dragon slaughtering blade slash yourself first when you draw it. There's no need for a direct attack. Just the residual energy that overflows and circulates is already extremely effective with a bit of control." Control? Is that the goal you're pursuing? Madame Halder's eyes remained closed. She felt the pain of her muscles twisting and tearing in every part of her body. She smiled without saying a word. Luonan's temporarily condensed fingers streaked across her back. The permeating water vapor became a medium for his mental senses, allowing him to probe deeper into the details of her body. But at the same time, most of his energy was placed on the lava lake in the stone forest of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District. This was because that was the essence of Madame Halder's goal. Ever since the early hours of the morning of New Year's Day, Luonan had already confirmed that Mrs. Halder was the first oblatum of the Blood Flame Order. She was the central axis that operated the entire Blood Soul Temple system. However, what this woman pursued was never control over the system. The Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District was nothing more than a tool to her. More accurately speaking, it was nothing more than a furnace. The extreme emotions poured in by her believers were the fuel for the furnace's flames. She continued to burn and grind, tempering it into a bright light. It did not belong to any system. It was a unique creation that belonged only to her. Because of this, she remained indifferent when Luonan continued to throw pressure and negative emotions at her. Even when the sun wheel behind the Wraith sign passed through the polar domain and Luonan to smash a terrifying extreme power into the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District, turning it into a forbidden zone of death. In essence, Madame Halder was deprived of control over the system of the Blood Soul Temple. She remained calm and composed. All of this, from Madame Halder's perspective, was a furnace fire. They were all accelerants. Only she herself was a valuable material. This woman was very crazy and she was even more interesting. There was just one thing that Luonan didn't understand. The grinded blade is a level higher than the user. This kind of technique. You're saying that this originated from the heart-searing blade issued by Her Majesty Empress Wu? It doesn't look like it no matter how I look at it. I'm afraid there aren't many people in this world who are equally proficient in the dripping sword, Mr. Luo. That's true. Luonan openly admitted. In any case, this core is quite high level. I'll study it a bit more later. Luonan withdrew his hand. Today's homework was more or less over. Madame Halder sat up with her arms propped up. She focused on regulating her energy, and only now did Yinli have the chance to speak. Aside from serving Madame Halder, she had another mission. Mr. Luo, we've already discovered the information you provided. We've locked onto the most likely areas. Please take a look. The work area displayed a satellite image of another major maritime metropolis in the East Asian region, Banyan City. 3 special areas had already been marked out. Right now, all of them appeared dark red, completely different from the other areas. Although the Order's influence in Banyan City isn't that great, Snake Tongue has always been independent. She doesn't have many old friends. It will be very difficult for her to transfer her soul to a second body. As long as we lock onto the location, we will be halfway to success. Today, I will rush to Banyan City to ensure that nothing goes wrong. Oh, that's fine. Madame Halder opened her eyes at this time. Snake Tongue is an experienced architect of the mental side. She is also world famous for her curse techniques. All sorts of traps and ambushes can't be underestimated. We need to be prepared to lose personnel. The transfer plan after we succeed needs to be even more secure. After all, we aren't the only ones searching right now. Yes. Luonan didn't mind too much. He wanted the Blood Flame Order to act. He just thought of it as looking for a logistics company. I'll be watching when the time comes. Madame Halder's energy had recovered a bit. She was already able to make small talk. Mr. Luo's ability to mentally travel 10,000 miles is truly enviable. She gave her hand to Yinli as she spoke. Yinli slowly stood up with Yinli's help. At the same time, she adjusted the position of the fireproof towel, allowing the exposed skin to rotate. There's only one international flight from T-City to Banyan City. It leaves this morning. You can move at night or early tomorrow morning. Chapter 695. To be precise, the so-called new plane was the deep blue world located at the center of the Pacific Ocean. It was joined by T-City and Chan City, the 2 cities that formed a long and narrow search triangle. After all, where was the new plane? Was it really a subsidiary plane of the deep blue world as the rumor said? Were there really extraordinaries who had already entered and explored it? There was no proof at all. Even so, it was impossible to dispel the thoughts of the various powers and powerful individuals who were determined to win. There are many people, but their minds are all on the ocean. This side is fine. Lady Halder was a bit reserved in her words. Perhaps there was even a bit of ridicule. Yinli answered for the specific data. According to the information we obtained, there are at least 20 extraordinaries participating in the 3,000-kilometer journey from T-City to the entrance to the deep blue world. There are nearly 8 million square kilometers of sea. The Star Alliance Committee has dispatched 60 naval ships and 20 airships of the Air and Space Army to act as the search force. There are over 20,000 people participating, and they are sparing no expense. The number of bounties and enlistments of social personnel will not be less than this number. In fact, this number has dropped from the peak of last month. Oh, the restless period has passed. Lady Halder smiled. After all, the so-called traces of Gongqi were just a glimpse. Actually, just a plausible clue was able to shift the focus of the search from the western Pacific Ocean to the southern Pacific Ocean, spanning 7,000 to 8,000 kilometers. It is quite astonishing. It is a new plane after all. Yes. Boundless wealth and power. Luonan didn't continue on this topic. Instead, he said goodbye. I still have classes in Xia City. I'll be heading back first. If there are any problems, contact me at any time. Mr. Luo, what about tomorrow's practice? I will notify you, along with the operation in Ban City. Luonan's condensed water man leaped into the air with these words. The light of the water diffused into mist, and he disappeared without a trace. Luonan said that he was returning to Xia City, but there were still some untruths. He didn't immediately turn around. Instead, his mind moved forward. He borrowed the evaporating water vapor on the surface of the sea and the rich environment of water molecules to lightly shake his soul cloak. He suddenly crossed a distance of 2,000 kilometers and arrived at the South Pacific Ocean northwest of T-City. Here, Luonan wouldn't gather water men like he did in front of Lady Halder. This was because there were at least 10 extraordinaries in this area. Their solidified configurations in the Abyss region were each guiding the storm turbulence in the Abyss region, interfering with the material plane in different ways, spreading across the sky and the sea in search of clues. Even though the ocean was vast and had a range of millions of square kilometers, 100 warships would not even amount to a sesame seed. However, it was convenient for soul power to travel, and they could sense each other from afar, so the phenomenon of meeting each other still existed. The soul forces of the dozen or so extraordinaries would occasionally cross paths, but they were still considered courteous. Sometimes they would even communicate with each other, maintaining a relatively balanced and peaceful state. At the same time, they formed a net of varying density. It looked like the gap wasn't small, but it was tight on the inside and loose on the outside. If anything were to happen, it would definitely be tightened in an instant, attracting the attention of all parties. The Blood Flame Order's intelligence wasn't wrong, but Luonan knew more than they did. Over the past 3 to 4 months, his consciousness had traveled across the Pacific Ocean with the support of the Soul Cloak. Chan City, D City, and the entrance to the Deep Blue World were all places he frequented. In the beginning, Luonan still came and went from the polar domain for the sake of caution. He used pure observation to understand the situation. But as time passed, Luonan gradually developed a new method due to the demands of reality. The water man condensed in D City had long since collapsed into beads of water, and the water vapor merged into the ocean. However, the rules and laws that formed the water man did not disperse because of the disintegration of its external form. On the contrary, without a relatively fixed and constrained structure, its series of changes and extensions became more effective. There was clearly an incorporeal frame within the void. It had practically completely abandoned the constraints of form. It was just a kind of structural concept. It was precisely with the insertion of this core of concept that the water vapor above and below the surface of the ocean possessed a special structural meaning on a higher level, even though it still maintained its natural form. From Luonan's perspective, a condensed water man and the several thousand square kilometers of ocean surface were both carriers of the core of concept. There was no essential difference between them. The same stream of water could be a probe for gathering information, or it could be a wire for transmitting information. It just depended on where it was located within the overall framework and what role it suited under the specific environmental conditions. As long as the core of concept didn't change, the overall framework could change according to the situation. The specific structural parts could be a probe one second and a wire the next. In short, because of the injection of Luonan's core of concept, the area of the ocean he was paying attention to came to life. It became a special structural creation. Even though it was affected by the basic structure of water molecules, the gravity of the earth, the winds and currents of the sea, the schools of water birds and fishes, and other quantitative and variable influences, with the limitations of form and the limitlessness of variables, this area of the ocean still possessed inconceivable characteristics under the control of Luonan's core of concept. It was an extension of Luonan's senses, and it could also become an enormous processing plant. All sorts of parts could be forged at any time, and different instruments could be pieced together. From multiple angles and levels, it could carry out reconnaissance, detection, guidance, and misdirection toward targets within its range. All of Luonan's actions were hidden under the great background of the natural activities of the ocean. It possessed a high degree of concealment. At the very least, the powerful people from the Star Alliance Committee, the Society Quantum Corporation, the Secret Order, and other different powers did not realize that there was a youth observing, probing, and even examining them right next to them on the ebb and flow of the ocean's surface. Who would have thought that the splashing waves, the sudden torrential rain, and the blowing winds could all be sensitive sensors? They could transmit all sorts of sensitive information to a distance of over 10,000 kilometers at all times? Luonan benefited greatly from the dozens of days of observation. However, the most direct harvest was the core of concept that grew increasingly refined and nimble during this process. Luonan called it the core. This was the origin of the dynamo core and the psychic core of the virtual brain system. It was the system's fundamental method of using simplicity to control complexity, using less to control more. Luonan was able to gain this comprehension thanks to Mrs. Halder. It was this woman's extreme tempering that allowed Luonan to realize that the core consciousness of humans could be tempered to such a degree. Luonan was not as extreme as Mrs. Halder, but he possessed a pure concept that was constructed from the formatting principles. With this as a foundation, Luonan tempered and forged it through countless configurations. Then he applied it in the dense sea region of extraordinaries, gradually forming a unique Luo core that belonged solely to Luonan. Luonan could be considered to have truly crossed the threshold of the virtual brain system in terms of configuration thinking. Yes, this should be the true face of Luonan Chi. The image of Luonan projected in the hearts of others needed to be stirred by the Luonan Chi and installed with the corresponding chip. Only then could it become material that Luonan could control. Only then would it truly have meaning for Luonan. Of course, the current Luo Jixin and Luo Nanqi were still far from their final forms. They had only absorbed the side of laws and rules. Emotions and desires were practically uncontaminated. They could only be used purely on the material plane. It would have been fine in the past, but Luo Nan could see the results of Mrs. Halder's hard work and the large fireball that was wantonly scattering light and heat in the polar domain. It was impossible for Luo Nan to ignore it. But he still didn't have a clue as to how to add this kind of power to it. Right now, Luo Nan's work was not the focus of Luo Nan's work. Gong Qi, who was becoming more and more of an influential figure, was the focus. Speaking of which, Gong Qi was trapped in the cloud world. Wasn't it all thanks to Luo Nan that he was able to stir up a storm? Only after confirming that everything in the relevant sea region was normal did Luo Nan's consciousness truly return. He went through a great shuttle, breaking through the barrier of space and time, and entered the cloud world. The torrential sea of clouds surged with waves. Blood-red rays of light penetrated through the gaps in the clouds. It was impossible to see the edge of the light, and it even blurred everything up and down. Luo Nan didn't care about the direction. He borrowed the soul cloak to quickly lock onto his key target. It was that old man Gong Qi who had been very active recently. If converted to Chan City's time, it was April 21st right now. It was a weekend off. Gong Qi had been exploring with Snake Tongue for 2 consecutive days, searching for the ultimate mysteries of the cloud world. Both of them were in a soul-body state. It was just that after half a year of grinding and dissipating, the difference between them was extremely obvious. Gong Qi's body burned with spiritual light. It was bright and resplendent, making him seem like a god. Snake Tongue, on the other hand, was shrouded in a thin layer of mist. Her radiance was not obvious and she was nearly transparent. She was mixed in with the surrounding clouds and could be drowned out at any time. In fact, Snake Tongue's soul body had already shrunk by more than 2 sizes. She followed behind Gong Qi, looking more like a legendary back spirit. She cast a gaze filled with resentment ahead, not concealing it at all. It was as if Gong Qi didn't feel anything. In fact, he didn't care at all. Half a year was enough to obliterate all promises, to shatter all hopes. Snake Tongue still remembered the day she was thrown into this strange world. It was October 25, 2096. At this moment, 180 days were about to be gathered. She went from the panic of being trapped here alone to the pleasant surprise and vigilance of Gong Qi crossing through space. Then came the days and nights of exploration and attrition. Her mood was synchronized with the state of her soul body. It continued to weaken, almost irreversibly. Her fleshly body, which was stored in Ban City, was about to reach the limit of the advanced life support system. According to the established procedures, a freezing operation would be carried out next to preserve her last shred of hope. However, with the degree of weakness of her soul body, what hope would there be even if she returned? What was the value of her existence now? Chapter 696. Gong Qi raised his head and looked at the ceaselessly flowing clouds. What he let out was an incongruous sigh. The light is getting stronger and stronger. Perhaps after a period of time, that light will be able to illuminate the entire vast thousand worlds. If one doesn't come here, they most likely won't be able to see such a resplendent scene of the polar domain. Snake Tongue didn't say a word. She faced him with indifference. In any case, she could only listen to Gong Qi's description. She couldn't sense what was happening in the polar domain at all. However, Luo Nan was using his soul cloak to sense the situation over here. His mood was inevitably affected. He knew what Gong Qi meant by light. Yes, that was the light of the polar domain. It was the light and heat emitted by the source of the terrifying power that Luo Nan had traced back to the Wraith sign. More than 4 months ago, it had briefly ascended into the sky in the polar domain to demonstrate its strength, but it had been blocked by a mysterious and unfathomable curtain. According to Luo Nan's knowledge, this was the case in the local space-time and the deep blue world. The only exception was here. For some reason, the curtain did not extend its magical effect to the cloud world. The light and heat emitted by that terrifying source continued to spread throughout the cloud world through the polar domain. And as time passed, it seemed to be getting closer and closer to the physical plane. Every time Luo Nan arrived at this place, he seemed to be able to hear the humming and trembling of the cloud world. This was the prelude to the friction and collision of space and time. Luo Nan didn't know the reason or the nature of all this, but he knew that the cloud world was facing a huge change. On the other hand, it was very likely that Gong Qi, who he'd always been targeting, had suddenly grasped a good opportunity to break out of this predicament. Gong Qi was a transcendent who had lived for more than 90 years. His cultivation and experience were top-notch. He would not let go of this opportunity. From the moment the rays of light had lit up the polar domain, this old fellow had invested a large amount of energy into research. More than 4 months, nearly 150 days of time, was enough for him to produce a certain amount of results. At the very least there was some movement. While conversing with Snake Tongue, Gong Qi pierced his soul force into the abyssal region and probed the polar domain. At the same time, he made slight adjustments to his own solidified configuration in order to adapt to the long-term illumination of the polar domain light. The abyssal region's constantly changing environment was also trying to figure out the corresponding rules and utilize them. Luo Nan quietly observed from the depths of the torrential turbulence of the abyssal region. Watching how Gong Qi adjusted the solidified configuration step by step, pondering over the structure and basic principles, grasping the habits of the structure, and referring it to his own thinking of the configuration. At the same time he could also verify the special zones in the abyss region and polar domain under the condition of crossing the space-time barrier, and what kind of changes would occur. In short, Luo Nan tried to speculate what stage Gong Qi's judgment of the situation had reached and how far he was from breaking out of the situation. Staring blankly was absolutely not an option. The development of the situation pushed Luo Nan to speed up his progress. In fact, Luo Nan himself was already impatient. What he needed to do now was to finish strengthening himself as soon as possible and prepare as many bargaining chips as possible, no matter what level or direction he was in. Snake Tongue, who was like a spirit behind his back, was one of them. The surgery he was paying close attention to today and tomorrow was the other. Oh, visitation time is almost up. As a student, he had to apply for leave if he wanted to visit the patient in time, but he couldn't make it to the weekend. But if he couldn't or if it was inconvenient, he could only skip class. Luo Nan imagined the scene of him taking a leave of absence. "Teacher, I want to apply for leave." "Reason for the leave?" "To visit the surgery patient." "What does it have to do with the patient?" "We've never met." "Which hospital?" "Mercy Heart Hospital. It's 2,000 kilometers away in Spring City." "How long do you need to apply for?" "That depends on whether things go smoothly or not." Forget it." Luo Nan could lie, but unless he really fabricated a melodramatic reason like a serious illness of his immediate family, the school would never grant him a leave of absence, no matter what, given his credit record of the past few months. What's more, Luo Nan had left Xia City as early as 9 o'clock in the evening of the 21st of April in order to eliminate the error of teleportation. He had been transported through the cloud world to the southwest wilderness area of Spring City. He was currently resting and reorganizing at the forward operating base, preparing to receive a mid-range cross-country trip of over 500 kilometers, as well as an even more exciting ambush operation in the city. No. It was visiting the patient. Luo Nan's consciousness rolled back, arriving at the edge of the volcanic area where the physical Blood Soul Temple was placed. Many instruments were unable to operate due to the environment of the volcanic area's core region being too vile. It wasn't easy to arrange supplies, so Luo Nan kept this forward operating base on the periphery. He had been replenishing supplies for the past few months. He had even installed a second-hand thermostatic system, causing the cave on the periphery of the volcanic area to become livable. There was no doubt that Luo Nan had done this out of consideration for himself. He had used this forward operating base as a transfer station over the past 100 days, but he had gone to quite a few places. Of course, practically no one knew about this, except for the little girl who was currently in the forward operating base, silently protecting his safety. "Hey Ruiwen. Good morning." "Good morning." Actually, the outside was still a pitch-black expanse due to the limitations of the time zone. Luo Nan practically didn't sleep for the entire night. He traveled between space and time, his telepathic thoughts rushing tens of thousands of kilometers. Right now his mind was trembling with energy, and he wasn't the least bit sleepy. Especially when he thought about the upcoming crossing of the wilderness and the follow-up operation in Spring City, he became all the more excited. After greeting Ruiwen, he once again inspected the assembly modules of the off-road vehicle he had prepared last night. He even did a manual loading and unloading. After all, if the vehicle broke down on the road, there was no AI in the forward operating base to help fix it. Everything was going smoothly. Over the past few months, he had been learning about mechanical design from Worker Zhai. He had also borrowed Worker Zhai's platform to frequently repair machines. With the addition of his mental side and configurational thinking, he could be said to be a veteran hobbyist. At the very least he was half a professional. The small off-road motorcycle was disassembled and assembled within 5 minutes, and the system passed the test in one go. Next was the testing of the electromagnetic Vanguard Z. Luo Nan confirmed that he was going to bring the exoskeleton equipment with him to act as a safeguard for the operation. He was already familiar with this exoskeleton equipment. The debugging time was even shorter and everything was ready in no time. Rui Wen just watched silently from the side during this time like a doll. Luo Nan didn't forget about her. He wiped his hands after all the debugging was completed, then he rubbed Rui Wen's head. Okay, everything is ready. I'm getting ready to go. You need to go to class as well. I'll go with you. I'm skipping class today. We'll skip together. Cough Rui Wen, you need to help me cover up. Aunt is already numb to me skipping class by myself, but if I bring you away, do you believe that she won't chase me all the way to Spring City? Rui Wen expressed very seriously, I don't believe it. You have to believe it even if you don't believe it. Luo Nan began to put on the face of an older brother. The operation will start in the afternoon, and the operation will be delayed. You'll be wasting over 10 hours here. What about your homework? Rui Wen's pitch-black eyes didn't move. Okay, I have no way to directly send it to Spring City, so I went around in a circle. You and I are different. You come as you please. How about this? If there's any danger along the way, I'll call for backup at the first instance. I'll also invite you over at the first instance after we reach Spring City. Let us brother and sister pair join forces and rob him. Forget about the last sentence. No matter what was said and done, the dignity of her older brother prevailed. Rui Wen finally yielded and returned to Xia City under Luo Nan's urging. She should be able to make it in time for breakfast. Today was more or less settled. Luo Nan let out a long breath. He didn't stop and began to move things outside. He had filled in the cracks in the rock flow near the forward operating base a long time ago. The caterpillar robot could also help with the transportation. Everything was ready in a short 15 minutes. He finished assembling the equipment in a certain flat area outside the cave and put on the light exoskeleton armor. Then he started up the off-road motorcycle. The motor hummed as it operated, just like his restless heart. April 22nd. The weather was clear with a force 2 to 3 easterly winds. There were no high-threat mutants along the planned route. The journey was estimated to take 6 hours and arrive before 1 in the afternoon. Luo Nan took a deep breath and adjusted his posture on the off-road motorcycle. He was just about to start up when he suddenly recalled something. Alright, take a picture as a souvenir. He released a miniature probing flying bug and gave a thumbs up to the camera, leaving behind a conclusive image. Luo Nan laughed with a ha sound. He raised his legs and the motor of the motorcycle sped up. He charged forward with a roar, charging straight toward the boundary of Spring City that was 500 kilometers away. The rapidly unfolding and changing wilderness was before his eyes. He had no companions, no bodyguards, no omnipresent psychic wave network, and no mission channel that constantly updated and alerted him. Luo Nan just drove the motorcycle and sped across the desolate wilderness. The howls of wild beasts and vicious birds rang in his ears. Occasionally he would see the dust and smoke of groups of beasts galloping into the distance. At the same time, the mutant multi-headed vulture high in the sky cast its vicious and greedy gaze over. The high-level hunters in the wilderness pricked up their ears one after another from the rhythmic vibrations of the ground. This was the wilderness. This was the main appearance that the Earth Monarch had spent decades dressing up. This was a place where countless people struggled to escape. At the same time, there were also countless people who forcefully ventured to explore this place. Luo Nan's grandfather, mother, and father had all left the most beautiful moments of their lives here. No matter where they went, there would always be some special and valuable things here. Luo Nan still didn't have a clear direction in regards to the wilderness. But Luo Nan was wantonly smearing traces that belonged to him within this enormous painting. Whether it was success or destruction, there was no need to pay attention to any of it. In this spacious and dangerous world, he naturally abandoned the city and all the rules and laws of his habitual living environment. He also abandoned the imminent pressure and danger. At least for this moment, he could enjoy the taste of unfettered freedom to his heart's content. Chapter 697. Spring City was located in the southwestern highlands. It was surrounded by many mountains and transportation was inconvenient. During the 100 years of peace before the Third World War, a series of road infrastructure had finally been built. However, after the war, the mutants had wreaked havoc, and large areas had become uninhabited. At present, most of the roads had been destroyed. One could only vaguely see some traces among the weeds, rocks, and collapsed mountain ruins. In such a place, the maglev flying vehicles in the city were not practical. Aerial vehicles like flying shuttles also had to face the attacks of flying mutants, and there was the possibility of crashing into mountains at any moment. Therefore, most people who made a living here chose traditional, sturdy SUVs. Coupled with some auxiliary modules like maglev, they could deal with most situations. At this moment, on a gentle slope of a mountain, a small convoy of 3 SUVs and about 10 people were carefully setting up equipment to monitor the surrounding environment. The leader was tall and burly with a crew cut. He wore sunglasses, a leather jacket, and a pair of coarse trousers. He looked rather valiant. However, at the same time he was also an expert in controlling equipment. He calmly commanded the crowd and asked his companions to install equipment in various positions. Every order was clear, and the scene was busy but not chaotic. Someone was willing to play the role of a lackey and praised, as expected of a field team. "With you, Brother Bao, we have a clear target." "Shut up. What's that sound?" "Ah." Brother Bao frowned and listened attentively. A few seconds later, his expression became even uglier. "Which idiot is this? Didn't you see the rolling earth dragon sign? I used maglev to move it bit by bit." At this moment, many people present could already hear the vibration of the motor engine. Of course, the most ear-piercing sound was the friction between the car and the bad road surface. "It's southwest. It's not coming from the city." The person in charge of remote monitoring raised his hand to inform them. Brother Bao moved over. Through the monitoring equipment, he saw a rolling earth dragon returning from the southwest wilderness. It was the dry season around Spring City for many years. Dust and grass were flying everywhere and it was hard to see clearly. He could only tell that it did not look like a large vehicle. "It doesn't look like a long-distance traveler. Maybe someone from one of the teams returned to the city temporarily?" While they were talking, the surveillance equipment finally captured some details. It was a small off-road motorcycle and it was all alone. Brother Bao cursed softly. "Send him a signal. If he wants to live, he has to take a detour. Even if he can survive, he has to compensate us for our losses." The lackey did not miss the opportunity to praise again. "Brother Bao is very particular. If you wanted me, I would have asked him to add another dish to the rolling earth dragon." "Cut the crap, hurry up and send the signal." "Oh my God." Brother Bao cried out involuntarily. Before that, in the surveillance screen in front of the rolling earth dragon, the hard ground suddenly exploded, and a huge pit with a diameter of more than 3 meters appeared. Soil and rocks flew everywhere. What was even more terrifying was that in the depths of the huge pit, there seemed to be a demonic giant flower blooming. It was formed by dozens of hundreds of slender tentacles, and light blue mist sprayed out from the center. In the blink of an eye, it swallowed the off-road motorcycle at the front of the earth dragon. "Bullshit rolling earth dragon, this is a chrysanthemum demon bug." Brother Bao's face turned green. He pulled out the topographic map and took another look. Then he slapped himself. "I'm so King stupid. There was clearly an underground river. Wasn't this the favorite place of the chrysanthemum demon bug? This is a trap. Retreat." He suddenly raised his voice. "Old 5, report to the branch and inform the city defense forces. Everyone retreat immediately." The chrysanthemum demon bug was one of the most famous B-grade mutants in the area around Spring City. Its threat level was B. It lived underground all year round and had extremely high intelligence. It could simulate the sounds and secretions of low-level mutants such as the rolling earth dragon to lure other predators, including human ability users, to take the bait and then kill and devour them wantonly. If this kind of mutant was too close to the city, it could pass through the sewage pipes and break through the city's defenses, causing great chaos. Therefore, in the city defense system, this fellow was always at the top of the list of targets to kill. It was definitely too late to think about this now. Brother Bao could not care less about being particular. Looking at the location where the chrysanthemum demon bug had appeared, their hunting team had basically taken a trip to the gates of hell. If the motorcyclist had not been the bait, their small team would have been wrapped up and swallowed a few minutes later. "I'll collect your corpse later, and bury it." Brother Bao is benevolent and righteous. Brother Bao slapped the lackey's head and roared for his men to retreat. "Retreat, retreat, retreat. Throw away all the equipment." The chrysanthemum demon bug's hunting zone has a radius of 50 kilometers. If you're too slow, you'll be waiting to be digested. More than 10 members of the hunting team squeezed into 3 SUVs. At this time, it was impossible to use the slow maglev plug-in. Instead, they drove at full power and sped down the rugged mountain road. Brother Bao's car felt like it was about to overturn several times. He relied on his years of driving skills and the smart system to forcibly correct it. Across the mountain, there was a muffled explosion and a sharp sizzling sound. That scalp-numbing sizzling sound was undoubtedly the sound of the chrysanthemum demon bug. As for the explosion, the motorcycle probably exploded. Brother Bao turned his head and looked back. There seemed to be a flash of light on the other side of the mountain, very much like the afterglow of a thermal weapon. Tragic, really tragic. Every year there were about 1,000 people in Spring City who died in the wilderness. There was no lack of ability users among them. Now there was another one. Brother Bao thought of something again. Pay attention to the bottom of the car. Refer to the topographic map and avoid the underground river. The chrysanthemum demon bug passes through the water. Its speed is not slower than a car. Can also spray poisonous fog. Just as he was shouting, the lackey beside him screamed, "Bug, it's coming up." Brother Bao turned around in shock and saw dozens of slender tentacles flying above the mountain. Occasionally they crossed the mountain barrier and rose and fell. This was not a normal method, but it was even more terrifying. Brother Bao cursed, but he had no other choice. He could only shout, "Speed up, speed up." The driver of the jeep he was in was an experienced veteran. Just by looking he could infer the approximate speed of the pursuers behind him. He immediately howled in despair, "They're going at least 200 kilometers per hour. There's no justice in this world." T. Brother Bao roared back. If the chrysanthemum demon bug could run at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour on the ground, its threat level would definitely not be B-. Even if the branch in the city defense army were to go all out, they would have to kill these perverted mutants. Messy thoughts that were of no help to the current situation flashed through Brother Bao's mind. However, when he turned his head to look at the flying tentacles, his mind was already blank. At this moment, there was a loud bang in front of him. The SUV at the front finally could not withstand the test of speeding on the rugged mountain road and flipped over. If not for the fact that the expensive SUV was relatively sturdy, the people in the car were agile, and the smart posture correction would have been just enough. This was a tragedy of falling straight down a cliff. The car was destroyed and people died. However, in this way the car in front was blocked by the car behind on the narrow mountain road. Retreat became a joke. At the same time, an even greater tragedy had clearly caught up. Brother Bao's mind exploded. He forcefully suppressed the stupid words of "charging over." Instead, a certain thought rushed out. "I can't embarrass Captain Chiu." In the next second he shouted, "Save him." The two SUVs behind him braked urgently. Brother Bao did not wait for the car to stop before jumping down. He pulled a few of his companions who had just gotten up from the ground and used brute force to straighten the overturned SUV. He then let the injured people with inconvenient legs sit in the other cars. The car behind quickly pass. "Hurry up and start the engine." The driver in front was a little dazed from the fall and did not know to check the car's condition immediately. Brother Bao's scalp went numb when he saw that. He rushed over, pushed him away and forcefully started the engine. Thank the heavens and thank the ancestors. There was no problem with the high-power modified motor of the off-road vehicle, and there was no problem with the intelligence system's instantaneous self-detection. At that moment, the two cars that passed quickly had already run a few hundred meters away. When Brother Bao turned around, the flying tentacles of the chrysanthemum demon bug had completely crossed the peak and were rolling over. "Quick, quick, quick." Brother Bao snatched the driver's seat and called everyone to get into the car. Without waiting for them to sit down, he stepped on the accelerator. The car roared forward. However, it had only traveled about 10 meters when the wind howled above its head. The swaying tentacles rode the wind and even whipped the broken windshield. In the next second, the chrysanthemum demon bug's body, which weighed at least 2 tons, smashed heavily onto the ground 20 meters away. The off-road vehicle braked suddenly, but it could not stop it and crashed heavily. Fortunately, the huge flesh tentacles in front were not hard enough. The off-road vehicle seemed to have hit a sponge, and it did not cause a more serious accident. "Reverse, reverse quickly." The original driver sitting in the front passenger seat screamed crazily. Brother Bao had already switched to reverse, but he did not step on the accelerator again. The chrysanthemum demon bug in front of him lay on the ground, its tentacles still twitching. There was still a slight fragrance of meat. The smell molecules penetrated the broken windshield and blew over with the dry mountain wind. Apart from its size, it looked more like a half-roasted sea anemone. Brother Bao stared at the huge piece of meat in front of him in a daze without blinking. At that moment, the roar of an electric motor sounded from behind. It belonged to an off-road motorcycle. A few seconds later, the other party stopped steadily at the side of the off-road vehicle, and a cold metallic luster pierced his eyes. Brother Bao, who had just retired from the army, could naturally tell at a glance that it was an exoskeleton armor. As for the model, why did it look more like a Sergeant X2 humanoid robot? Modified goods? The metal armor covered the other party's face and figure. Brother Bao could not guess the other party's origin at all. He could only follow the simplest logic. Are you a soldier? There was no reaction from the other party. Brother Bao asked foolishly, "What's the matter?" A buzzing voice finally came from behind the metal mask. "Do me a favor." "Yes, go ahead." Brother Bao's mind finally came around. He had killed the chrysanthemum demon bug alone. He was definitely a B-rank expert. There were less than 10 such people in Spring City. He definitely had to respect him. Jacket and pants. Ha! Alright, use your sunglasses too. Half a minute later, Brother Bao obediently handed over his equipment. The motorcyclist nodded and pointed at the chrysanthemum demon bug in front of him. "I'll leave this to you." As he spoke, he gave Brother Bao a thumbs up, probably to express his gratitude. Amidst the roar, the off-road motorcycle sped on the mountain road. Brother Bao and the people in the car were dumbfounded. A few minutes later, a lackey called. Brother Bao, where did you drive that motorcycle?" Chapter 698. The off-road motorcycle retracted its wildness in the wilderness. It traveled at a speed of 70 kilometers per hour amidst the dense flow of traffic. Luo Nan's current appearance was that of Brother Bao's on the mountain road. He wore a leather jacket on his upper body, coarse trousers on his lower body, and a pair of large-toed boots. He also wore large sunglasses on his face, covering half of his overly young face. Luo Nan's physique was quite different from Brother Bao's, but after taking into account the amplification of the exoskeleton armor, it was more suitable. He followed the techniques taught by Red Fox and smeared some camouflage paint on his face, causing his skin to become coarse. He raised his collar and covered his entire body tightly. Aside from his small palms, the current Luo Nan was a burly man with a height of nearly 190 centimeters. He drove the wild off-road motorcycle on the intercity highway of Spring City. The surrounding skyscrapers cast shadows upon them, obliterating the difference between Spring City and Xia City to a large degree. No wonder some people said that the 88 metropolitan areas of the world were basically copied and pasted onto Earth. However, the electromagnetic waves shuttling back and forth in the surrounding void, as well as the signal commands contained within, pointed out the difference between the two. The authority function of the wristband popped up a reminder of temporary registration. The Skynet equipment from the streets and alleys uploaded the image data of the off-road motorcycle and its driver to the SCA's Social Authority database for comparison and search. The exoskeleton armor, which was a modified military item, was mostly unable to escape the monitoring and defense of various scanners. It had a built-in chip that needed to be docked with the relevant system, registered, and obtained authorization. It went without saying that if the driver's identity, social authority, and the process of selling, using, and remodeling the relevant equipment did not correspond, forming a complete chain of information, then the police department's drones, the SCA's operations team, and even the city defense army would be dispatched according to the level of danger. They would carry out coercive measures against the outsiders. 1,000 days at home is good, but a day outside is hard. In the current information age of the IoT, a normal person who wanted to be a bit rebellious and go on an exciting trip would probably face such a situation. However, the key point was that Luo Nan was not a normal person. He had trained with Red Fox, who was proficient in urban stealth and assassination, for 2 months. He already had a rough understanding of how to hide from the government's authority system. More importantly, he had the external neuron. He could use interference waves to easily penetrate deeper into the system and use a more willful method to alter the key data. Luo Nan wasn't a professional. He might not be able to pull off a flawless disguise, but it was enough as long as he could hide for a dozen or so hours. The off-road motorcycle passed through the peripheral satellite cities and entered the city. It was around 2 in the afternoon, an hour later than expected. This was because of the mountain roads around Spring City and the relatively dense number of mutants, which more or less caused some hindrance. Luckily, Luo Nan left quite a bit of room for maneuver. He activated the off-road motorcycle's autopilot mode and let it follow the predetermined route to the predetermined location. At this moment, his soul energy was interacting with the external neuron, causing the interference waves to cover a radius of several dozen kilometers. It was like another form of map navigation, guiding the car to its destination. More importantly, the interference wave had found its intended target, which was the gynecology ward of Mercy Heart Hospital, which was 20 kilometers away, and re-established the connection. On the virtual brain system interface, a window related to the night-level basic biochemical reactor furnace appeared. A series of system information was refreshed. There were many glaring warning messages among them. They were all related to biochemical pollution and the self-destruct program. From Luonan's perspective, this was already a common topic. He skimmed over the messages until he discovered a status update. The furnace has entered offline hibernation mode. It is currently in a transplantable state. At the same time, the third-level interface of the Wraith Sign system, the Jintong Spiritual Light Seed, also began the preloading process. The two interfaces synchronized and connected, ceaselessly updating information. They echoed with each other in preparation for the upcoming operation. This was the key reason why Luonan needed to personally come. After all, it would be like what he did a few months ago at Aurora Cloud City. The long-range radiation of interference waves would create far too large of a commotion, and there would be a slight delay. It was very likely that it would lead to unpredictable consequences. Yes, it was like this. Luonan gripped the handlebars of the motorcycle back and forth. He breathed in a few mouthfuls of the warm air of Spring City, releasing the nervousness and excitement of his first solo operation. Half an hour later, before 3 in the afternoon, Luonan arrived at Mercy Heart Hospital of Spring City. This hospital was located in the lower region of a 140-story skyscraper. It was a public hospital of a certain administrative district of Spring City. Luonan didn't directly enter. Instead, he used the external maglev light rail track of the high-rise building to spiral upwards. He arrived at the parking lot closest to the top floor of the building. He casually tossed the off-road motorcycle into a corner and entered the building. The top floor of this building was a medical device research and development center. There were relatively few people coming and going. Luonan's current attire would be quite eye-catching if he were to appear in front of people. But he had the external neuron by his side, and the range of his mental senses was beyond imagination. The routes he chose were all in the blind spots of the surveillance inside and outside of the building. They were also places where the footprints of people were rare. Even if there were some monitored areas that he was unable to bypass, he could rely on interference waves to forcefully disturb them. And so Luonan strolled a circle around the high-rise area. He followed the building's regular green track and went all the way up. He arrived at the rooftop sky garden, which was also the employee activity area. It was currently working hours, so there weren't many people here. But there was something rather eye-catching. It was the pure black flying shuttle on the parking apron that was one floor higher than the employee activity area. Through his mental senses, Luonan knew that although the shuttle's cabin door was closed and it hadn't been activated, there were still 4 passengers inside. They were on standby at all times. Luonan only stopped for a moment in the employee activity area. He looked at the flying shuttle from afar, then turned around and left. He took the elevator down, walking and stopping along the way. A few minutes later, he arrived at the floor of Mercy Hospital. At this time, the interference waves formed by the combination of his soul strength and the external neuron were already being used in the hospital management system. They had gathered key information. This information was the scheduled time for today's surgery at Mercy Hospital. There was one message among them: Rin Chi Gynecology Department. Open hysteromyomectomy. Operation Room 4, Intelligent. Scheduled time, 1600 hours. The medical personnel who had been continuously working at the Mutant Research Center for over 4 months was finally unable to ignore the rapidly growing hysteromyomas. They decided to carry out the surgery. Luonan confirmed the time. It was a bit past 3 in the afternoon. It was just right. The real-time structural diagram of Mercy Hospital was imprinted before his eyes under the effects of the mental sensing network. Luonan walked unhurriedly and familiarly to the surgical area. But he didn't get too close. This was because he sensed the existence of 2 energy targets that were clearly different from ordinary people within the mental sensing network. One of them was like a raging flame. Powerful psychic waves radiated from his body at all times. He should be a powerful fleshly body, and he was an external type. Generally speaking, the impact of such a character was astonishing. The other person was clearly much more low-key. His energy was obscure and unclear, but he was extremely sensitive. He constantly maintained the intersection of the mental and material planes, floating up and down. Luonan was quite familiar with this type of ability user. Cat Eyes was this type. But when it came to the level of soul strength, there was still a considerable gap between them. Therefore, this person should be a very powerful scouting type ability user. If Luonan used Cat Eyes as a benchmark to judge, he was most likely an architect-level expert. Alright, the fleshly body in front was the same. 2B rank experts overseeing things showed how important this surgery was to the people behind the scenes. Luonan also attached great importance to it. He specifically called over the Wraith sign. He used the Wraith sign's remarkable methods to monitor these 2B rank ability users from the polar domain. He watched how they arranged things and then compared it with his own plan to carry out the final fine adjustments. Time passed by the minute and second. Luonan strolled around the periphery of the operating area, precisely avoiding the sensing range of the psychic ability user that resembled Cat Eyes. By the time he made his fifth turn, the AI machinery in Operating Room 4 had begun its operation. Simple surgeries such as the hysteromyomectomy had already been realized in the medical world to be 100% automated. The AI surgical robot could perform the surgery to near perfection. All the doctors needed to do was to perform routine management in front of the monitoring screen. However, there was now an outsider in the monitoring room of the AI surgical platform. It was the psychic ability user that resembled Cat Eyes. According to the doctors present, he was called Mr. Lan. He used the camera and mental senses to monitor the entire surgery process. Mr. Lan's partner was the fleshly body next to Mr. Lan. Right now, Mr. Zhao was not in the monitoring room. Instead, he was wearing a large white coat and entering the operating area, which was nominally only accessible to doctors. Of course, he was not here to operate on patients. His task was to receive and protect patients. In the monitoring room of the AI surgical platform, Mr. Lan kept an eye on the progress of the surgery in Operating Room 4. He kept in touch with Mr. Lan at all times. The anesthesia has taken effect. The surgery is about to begin. The laparotomy has been performed. The estimated time is 25 minutes. The hysteromyoma has been removed. The seal is complete. Place it on the conveyor belt. Prepare to receive it. Mr. Lan, who was dressed like a doctor, was already standing at the exit of the conveyor belt outside of Operating Room 4. This place was usually used to transmit the tissues of the patient that had been surgically removed. It was displayed to the patient's family. If there was a desire to collect it, it could be discussed. Right now, a sealed metal box came out of the conveyor belt. The box itself looked quite high class. It was equipped with a sophisticated combination lock and there was a display screen on top of it. It displayed the conditions of the environment inside the box and emitted a green lustrous light. It displayed the objects placed inside the box. They matched the preset conditions and could be taken away without any worries. Mr. Lan didn't open the box for confirmation. He didn't have the authority to do so. Mr. Lan was the same. Supposedly, this was to avoid contaminating the special tissues inside the box. Only when the box was on the flying shuttle and entered the specially set environment could a second confirmation be done. Chapter 699. Mr. Lan came out of the control room and walked to the entrance of the operating area. At this time, Mr. Lan also came out of the operating area. He had long since grown impatient with the white coat on his body. He took it off as soon as he walked out. However, he had already buckled the lockbox on his wrist in advance. He could only curl his lips and directly tear the cuffs of his sleeves. He then threw the damaged white coat into the trash bin at the side. The two of them didn't say much. They walked side by side to the exclusive express elevator. The moment the elevator closed, Mr. Lan tilted his head and glanced outside through the gap. He saw a burly man wearing a leather jacket walking toward the operating area. Mr. Lan signaled with his eyes, "Is something the matter?" Mr. Lan glanced at the lockbox again and shook his head. That fellow's weight seemed somewhat abnormal. He might be a modified person. His aura was a bit stronger than an ordinary person's, but it was limited. Moreover, he was heading in the opposite direction from them. He wasn't a target that needed attention. The express elevator went straight to the highest floor. A minute later, the two of them arrived at the Sky Garden and stepped onto the apron at the highest floor. The personnel left behind in the shuttle had already received the news. They opened the shuttle's cabin door just in time. The two of them entered the cabin. They didn't have the slightest idle talk. They directly walked toward the middle cabin. That was an isolated testing environment specially arranged for the important items to be escorted this time. It was also the last and most important testing segment of the escort mission. According to the designated procedures, The two of them simultaneously entered their fingerprints, irises, passwords and other information into the lockbox. They smoothly took out the metal box from inside and placed it in the isolated environment. The testing system immediately operated automatically. It controlled the environmental conditions and released complex password information that corresponded with the password on the metal box. Up until now, everything was very normal. According to the procedures, once the target was confirmed to be correct, the isolated testing area would be completely sealed off to give the protected target the best living space. This area was constructed from a mixture of high-strength special glass and metal. Even the powerful Birank, who were known for their brute force, and the Deep Blue Walker equipped with highly destructive weapons would find it difficult to break through in a short amount of time. Even if the shuttle itself was hit by a missile, the items in this area would certainly be the last to be destroyed. The strict and somewhat complicated testing process continued to advance. At this time, Mr. Lan received a call. He frowned and glanced over. He saw that it was the person in charge of connecting with him from Mercy Hospital. He pondered for a moment and then connected. Without waiting for him to speak, the other side already shouted, "Mr. Lan, someone has broken into the operating area." "Oh. It's a big guy in a leather jacket. He's heading straight for operating room 4. Mr. Lan's heart skipped a beat. Mr. AI, who was beside him, also caught the keywords in the conversation and turned his head abruptly. "Bring it over," Mr. Lan ordered. The receptionist was stunned. "What?" "Bring the surveillance footage over." This operation was relatively simple. It only took about 2 seconds before a stream of information flowed in. Mr. Lan conveniently projected it into the air. The surveillance footage clearly showed a burly man wearing sunglasses and a jacket casually walking to the door of Operating Theater 4. He ignored the no trespassing sign in front of him and the medical staff who chased after him shouting at him to stop him. He pushed open the door and entered. There was an electronic lock on the door of the operating theater, but it was useless. The surveillance camera switched to show the situation in the operating theater. At the moment, the artificial intelligence surgical robot was still performing the suture. It completely ignored the changes outside and maintained a respectable level of concentration. The big guy didn't bother him and walked straight to the window of the conveyor belt. This route made Mr. Lan, who was still in the monitoring room a few minutes ago, feel his heart skip a beat. It was also at this moment that the big guy suddenly turned his face. His dark sunglasses stared directly at the camera. As if he was infected with a fatal infection, the surveillance footage turned pitch black. The receptionist of Mercy Hospital let out a meaningless wail. The surveillance footage has been destroyed. Mr. Lan's eyebrows were already locked tight. His heartbeat had also deviated from the normal range. The series of images transmitted on the surveillance camera were like a horror movie's editing, sending a fatal message to him and his partner. In the next second, the isolation examination area flashed red, and a piercing alarm sounded. It was connected to the movie plot from before. It was like a ferocious ghost suddenly appeared in front of the camera, letting out a strange, penetrating laugh. The hair on Mr. Lan's back stood on end. Something's wrong. Mr. AI's reaction was even more direct than Mr. Lan's. He pressed hard on the peripheral glass and stared at the system information that flowed like water. He didn't care about anything else except for one word that was the most important. Does not meet the requirements. Mr. Lan and Mr. AI felt as if their hearts had been stabbed by a sharp knife at the same time. The red light reflected on their faces, but the background was still deathly pale. "That guy!" Mr. AI roared. He turned around and ran out. Someone accidentally blocked in front of him and was also pushed away by his arm. He fell to the ground and almost fainted. Mr. Lan's first reaction was also to rush out. His feet were already moving, but he stopped abruptly. He stared at the shuttle staff. "Contact headquarters, requesting remote control." The staff was still in a daze. The receptionist of Mercy Hospital was still shouting on the comms, "Hello? Hello? Mr. Lan, that person came out of the surgery room. The security couldn't do anything to him." Mr. Lan cut off the comms. At this time, the red light of the isolation examination area had already seeped into his eyes. He stared with bloodshot eyes and squeezed out the words from between his teeth. "Headquarters remote control." The staff finally remembered that this was part of the emergency procedure, so he hurriedly obeyed the order. A few seconds later, another wave of detection light cut through. All kinds of information refreshed, but it was faster than the previous process. Another wave of dazzling red light sprayed out from the isolation area. Lan Xiang looked straight at the light, motionless. Lan Xiang, what are you doing? God, look at what you've done. The request for remote control alarmed the person in charge of the laboratory. The person on the other side instinctively roared and threw the blame, showing that he was completely unprepared in the face of an unexpected situation. Lan Xiang retorted without showing any weakness. You're the one who made a sh*TTY safety design. I need to open this damn box right now. The person in charge of the laboratory turned red. No, you don't have the authority. I don't either. Then find someone who has the authority. Where's Jeff? If he can't do it, then get me Li Wei. Are you crazy? Lan Xiang knocked on the hard isolation glass. Look at this notification. I don't want to talk to idiots anymore. The person in charge's nostrils were almost bursting from the breath. The next moment he was pushed away from the screen by a hand. Then a young man with snow-white skin and strange green hair came to the screen. He stared at the isolation area for a second and said, "It's open now." Lan Xiang was also stunned for half a second, mainly because he didn't expect Li Wei to appear the moment he mentioned Li Wei. Fortunately, he quickly came to his senses and turned to look. He saw the metal box's lid pop up, revealing the edge of the snow-white gauze and a dark red sarcoma-like body. At that moment, the sarcoma was still pulsating. Lan Xiang was stunned, and then his hair stood on end. He couldn't care less about what headquarters thought and immediately contacted his partner. Come back, it's a trap. Before he finished his sentence, the video communication with headquarters was distorted, and all communications were cut off. The lighting in the central cabin collapsed. As the power system in the isolation area was independently supplied, it lasted for half a second longer. Because of this, Lan Xiang saw a slender, pale hand reach out from the edge of the light. Every inch the hand moved forward, the light dimmed. It was clearly as fast as lightning, but for some reason, it felt like a cruel blunt knife stabbing into his heart, grinding away his thoughts and reason bit by bit. The hand brushed past the metal box and darkness descended completely. The darkness didn't last long, maybe a second, maybe even less. The backup power system was activated and the light came back on. Lan Xiang stood where he was. In the isolation area opposite him, the metal box was still in its original place, but the gauze inside and more importantly the dark red sarcoma on it had disappeared. The isolation area was completely sealed, and there were no signs of damage. Of course there was no normal switch. It was like a ghost passing through the wall, bringing the object they had carefully protected into the unknown netherworld. After a second, Mr. Lan turned around and rushed to the flying shuttle's door. This was an instinctive action and he didn't even know what he wanted to do. But after rushing out of the cabin door, the range of his spiritual senses, which had been extended to the limit, really did appear. Lan Xiang trusted his senses and rushed to the edge of the parking apron. His field of vision suddenly widened, and he could see past the sky garden on the top floor and part of the high-rise open-air parking lot on the side. Then Lan Xiang saw a muscular man wearing a jacket and sunglasses walk out of the parking lot's exclusive elevator at a pace that was neither fast nor slow. He got on an off-road motorcycle and started it. The motorcycle didn't leave immediately but stayed where it was. In the whirring sound of the motor, the muscular man in sunglasses raised his head and slightly turned his face. His dark glasses accurately blocked Lan Xiang's fierce gaze. Under the glasses, the corner of his mouth opened, revealing undisguised malice and pleasure. Lan Xiang's brain exploded, but his characteristic calmness quickly took over. The parking lot was more than 400 meters away from where he was. His senses could reach it, but it was no longer effective. He tried to re-establish communication with his partner. But it was also at this moment that the muscular man in sunglasses in the parking lot raised his arm and raised his thumb. Praise or sarcasm? Lan Xiang quickly knew that he was gravely mistaken. The muscular man in sunglasses was like a child. He raised his thumb and stretched out his index finger, seriously gesturing the shape of a gun. Then there was a bang. The spiritual sense network that Lan Xiang had worked hard to open up instantly had a huge gap. It was as if a spatial storm had suddenly descended, and it was as if a terrifying plasma grenade had exploded in front of his face. 400 meters, spiritual side, abyss area. Chapter 700. Wu Zunliang sat in the wide mobile surveillance vehicle. Screens and projections from 3 directions were playing images, tables and data information at every moment, painting him with a colorful luster. This mobile surveillance vehicle was originally used to monitor and analyze the real-time images in the wilderness, but now that the field collection work had come to an end, it was used to do graphical processing. At the very least, it was necessary to package the results of more than half a year of hard work in order to convince the investors who were best at thinking with their eyes and testicles. This was the evaluation and method that the early investors used for their own kind. This kind of packaging work was naturally handled by professionals. The experimental dogs under Wu Zunliang completely retreated to the position of odd job workers and played second fiddle. In front of the 3 projection screens, 7 or 8 men and women of different ages were scattering and piecing together the various results of the research team over the past half a year. The originally rigorous logic gave way to a more intuitive and impactful visual effect to serve the almost absurd dreamlike conjectures. Wu Zunliang began to pinch his eyebrows. On one hand, it was annoying to watch, and on the other hand, he was also an old man in his 90s. Even at the end of the 21st century, where the average lifespan exceeded 100 years, he was no longer at an age where he was full of energy. Returning from the wilderness laboratory hundreds of kilometers away from the city, the convoy had already been bumpy on the rugged mountain road for 6 or 7 hours, almost making his stomach jump out of his stomach. Ding Jing, who was 5 years younger than him, had already fallen asleep with his head tilted up, saliva dripping down his neck. Wu Zunliang did not laugh at him. In any case, if it were him, he would not be much better. In fact, the 2 old men could go to the car in the back and sleep, but unfortunately they could not reach the state of out of sight, out of mind, so they could only waste time here. What was he thinking before? The dense fragrance of tea entered his nose, and a female student in a hunting suit brought a cup of tea. The cup was large enough to drink like a bull, and it was warm in his hand. A sip could warm his stomach, but unfortunately his heart and lungs did not change much. After Wu Zunliang drank 2 mouthfuls of hot tea, he remembered to speak. Tang Yi. Teacher. About that explanation, that topic, a very interesting idea. Wu Zunliang blinked his sore eyes, and then narrowed his eyes at the disciple he was most proud of in recent years. 2 seconds later, he grinned and said, it is just an idea. No, it is extremely provocative both to people and to money. While the teacher and the student were talking, the experimental dogs in the mobile surveillance vehicle were working hard on their chores while they pricked up their ears. Tang Yi's words could be the source of their salary for the next year and a half. It could also be the start of a new round of overtime. It was a matter of life and death. They had no choice but to pay attention to it. But at that moment, the bumpy car slowed down and came to a stop. Soon, the door of the carriage opened, and Senior Colonel Meng Tu, who was in charge of the team's safety, stepped forward and informed them, "There's a change in the flight schedule, so we won't be able to leave tonight. We'll rest in Spring City for the night, and we'll decide if the situation changes tomorrow." We shouldn't have left in the first place. Wu Zunliang slapped his knee and spat. It's all because of the money. Old Ding Jing, who was behind them, finally woke up and asked in confusion, "What's wrong? We've arrived?" Senior Colonel Meng Tu repeated his words again, and Ding Jing chuckled. "Out of habit," she retorted, "you're already here and you're still saying such things. Your old pan might have already prepared breakfast for tomorrow. It'll be a waste." "Don't worry, there's no need to think about breakfast. She's prepared a belly full of sarcastic words." Wu Zunliang chuckled and stood up while the car stopped. He loosened his muscles and temporarily forgot about that damned lecture topic. He asked, "Did she say what's going on? Why are there abnormal movements from the mutants, affecting the takeoff and landing of the flight?" Meng Tu shook his head. "From the looks of it, it has nothing to do with the mutants. I heard that a case has occurred in the city, and they're currently investigating and searching for the culprits. Both air and land transportation have been restricted. A murder case. It seems to be a robbery, but I'm not too sure about the specifics. However, there's an arrest scene in front of us. The motorcade will have to wait for a while before passing through. Didn't they catch them? They're suspected to be accomplices." Ding Jing curled her lips. "In this world, there's no place to rob a bank. How big of a case can they commit?" The corner of Meng Tu's mouth twitched. Seeing that his half-year sentence was about to end, he couldn't be bothered to lower himself to the level of these 2 old men. These 2 old men were nearly 200 years old together. They had pretty much experienced everything, yet they were extremely calm and collected. Ding Jing laughed. "At least we didn't get the news when we arrived at the airport. We can spend the night in the hotel and concentrate on organizing the information." Wu Zunliang snorted. "What's the fuss about when we're about to leave? Who was the fuss just now?" Ding Jing didn't even deign to scold him. She just said, "If everything was done properly, why would we need to worry about it?" The current situation is that the lecture topic is very frightening. It forcefully relies on some new plane. But where's the argument? Whether it's Xia City or Spring City, they're all using a bunch of so-called first-hand information to blackmail people. Who are they trying to fool to get those people to throw money at them? Wu Zhuanliang shot a glance at Meng Tuesday. His gaze pointed towards the female disciple he was proud of. His meaning was, "Oh, it's your turn to continue the previous topic." Tang Yi was pushed to the front by her teacher, but she was still calm. "The latest data is pretty good. We're doing comparative research. The topic comes from the comparison. Hee little Tang, you graduate students can handle the updating of data. Is there a need for us two old men to come over? You're right about one thing. The topic comes from the comparison. But where are the new topics that can be continued after the comparison? Suspected planar pollution source interference comparative research. This topic is quite resounding." The big and small bosses were scolding each other. The experimental dogs in the car shrunk their necks and acted as if they didn't understand what the humans were saying. They weren't in the mood to work. There was a young man operating in front of the screen. He was more curious about the outside world than the internal squabbles. He secretly took a look at the external camera of the mobile surveillance car. He wanted to watch the show. But he made a mistake. He forgot to split the screen and shrink it. Now everyone in the car could see it. The front of the motorcade was indeed a mess. A group of people were confronting the military and police. There were also physical conflicts. The scene was explosive. Coupled with the black muzzles that had been raised, it didn't look like an arrest. It looked more like a prelude to an armed conflict. Someone cried out. The young man hurriedly tried to cut it, but he heard two people say at the same time. "Wait." It was Wu Zhuanliang and Meng Tu who spoke. In the past 6 months, there weren't many times when they had the same opinion. Wu Zhuanliang stared at the screen without blinking. "That car is stuffed with chrysanthemum bugs?" Meng Tu didn't speak again, but his eyes also pointed at the small motorcade of 3 SUVs in front of them, especially the car filled with indescribable meaty threads. Relatively speaking, Wu Zhuanliang's thoughts were simpler. "We didn't collect any specimens of chrysanthemum bugs this time, right? Ask them if they were hunted in the volcanic area or outside the area. It would be great if there were fire god ants parasitizing them." Meng Tu frowned and looked at it for a long time. Then he personally operated it. He enlarged the external camera and locked on to the details of the chrysanthemum bugs, especially the seemingly distorted burn wounds. "Wait a minute, I'll go down. Ask them where they are," Wu Zhuanliang reminded him. Meng Tu didn't respond and got out of the car. Looking at the image of the external camera, he went straight to the scene of the conflict. The young experimental dogs all stared at him with some kind of malicious expectation. However, the change in the situation was still beyond most people's expectations. After Meng Tu went over and revealed his identity, both sides showed respect or fear, and then, they compromised. Of course, there was a relatively long communication in the middle, but the emotions and attitudes on the faces of everyone on the opposite side were still very clear under the high-precision camera. Senior Colonel Meng really has face. An experimental dog who accidentally regarded Meng Tu as a security captain for a long time finally realized what kind of status as senior colonel of the Special Warfare Forces had. Not mentioning how nervous the experimental dogs were, Meng Tu quickly came back. When he got in the car, Wu Zhuanliang asked, "Are they selling it? Let's go back to the city with them. There's something we can confront and confirm." Meng Tu was worried that the two old men would cause trouble again, so he explained, "It's the X2 robot we encountered when we just moved to Spring City last year. It's the one that affected the sampling in the volcanic area and destroyed our first wave of mimicry reconnaissance planes. Didn't it enter the core of the volcanic area? Afterwards there were no results." "Oh." The two old men acted as if they had suddenly realized something. Ding Jing was very surprised. "It's been almost half a year and it's so far away. How do you know it's related to that robot?" "Because of the wound." At this time, the conflict ahead had temporarily calmed down and was preparing to move again. Meng Tu didn't mind chatting with the two old men for a while. He was also in a good mood after unexpectedly discovering an important clue. The X2 robot from last time embodies a kind of special technique. It's not convenient to talk about the specifics, but it's the kind that we Deep Blue Walkers pay a lot of attention to. It's a pity that we didn't have any new clues until this chrysanthemum demon bug corpse. The wound on it is very similar to the situation that appeared half a year ago. The format of fire, the extraordinary power enchantment, had always been the focus of the military's research. Naturally, They had to pay 120% attention to situations that appeared outside of the system. Meng Tu thought for a moment and said, Professor Wu, Professor Ding, I want to get a brief report on the cause of the chrysanthemum demon bug's death as soon as possible. I hope to borrow the research team's equipment. No problem, it's fine if you lend it to me. Wu Zhuanliang had a face full of generosity as he knocked his own chest. In any case, I can't leave at night. It's just the right time to do something. Senior Colonel Meng, go and inform the sampling. Hey little Zhao, go and help. The experimental dog got up with a tragic and stirring heart, shook his head and wagged his tail as he followed Meng Tuesday. Chapter 701. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the Mercy Hospital robbery briefing was held at the Spring City Military and Police Joint Defense Center. Meng Tu was able to participate in the meeting as the provider of important clues, a high-ranking officer of the Field Army's Special Forces, and a part of his identity as a guest. He had basically completed most of his objectives at this point. Just as he was wondering if he should communicate with his superior, Tian Bang, someone greeted him from the staff area. He turned around and saw a familiar face. Major Chen, no, Lieutenant Colonel Chen, congratulations. Lieutenant Colonel Chen took the initiative to greet him. He was the person in charge of the supply base when the scientific research team first arrived in Spring City. Half a year ago he was still a major. Now, his rank had risen by 1 rank and he was not even 50 years old. Even in the city defense system, it was still something worth celebrating. Lieutenant Colonel Chen had a good personality and a good temper. He was a very smooth person and knew how to expand the topic. He knew that he could greet Meng Tu, but there was nothing to talk about. Thus, he decisively introduced another person. Senior Colonel Meng, this is the hero of our Spring City Army, Captain Cho Wei. Meng Tu was wondering who this person was wearing sunglasses in the conference room. He immediately came to a realization when he heard this. He immediately stood up, saluted, and extended his hand. The other party's movements were almost synchronized. Then they shook hands. Captain Cho, no, I should call him Junior Cho. I'm a student in the 3rd phase of the burning stage, 1 batch ahead of you. I remember that you were with our Major General Tian and Major He Yuan. The other party took the opportunity to call him Senior Meng. His voice was hoarse and he still did not take off his sunglasses. Meng Tu did not find it strange. This Captain Cho in front of him was the commander of the Deep Blue Walker team who was protecting the vagrant tribe during their 1,000-mile return journey last year. Unfortunately, he encountered a mutation infection, but he suppressed it with his strong willpower until the mission was completed. Although Meng Tu was in the wilderness laboratory at that time, he had heard of his name for a long time. I've seen your frontline footage. You faced a poisonous mantis and your exoskeleton was damaged. You didn't even take half a step back. You traded injuries for lives. Most importantly, you completed it in 4 seconds. Even I can't do better than you. Cho Wei was not good with words and was a man of few words. He only said, thank you, senior. No qualified commander would want to let go of such an excellent person, and Meng Tu was the same. You've recovered from your injuries, right? It would be a pity to stay in the Coastal Defense Force. How about it? Are you interested in joining the Coastal Defense Force? Cho Wei just smiled. I'm still under observation. Although Cho Wei was wearing sunglasses for a burner like Meng Tu, it wasn't completely effective. He understood what Cho Wei meant and comforted him. Being able to participate in this kind of occasion is in itself a very good development. Cho Wei said objectively, it's mainly related to the research and treatment center. Oh, according to the information, the woman who performed the surgery has been working in the research and treatment center for a long time. This happened when I came out for surgery today. The timing is very good. Lieutenant Colonel Chin really didn't want to discuss this topic, so he forcefully changed the topic. Senior Colonel Meng, it's rare for you to come back to Spring City. Let me and Captain Cho play host for the next 2 days. You can also come to my place and train those newbies. Meng Tu chuckled. I can't stay for long because I have a mission. I'll be escorting the research team out tomorrow, so I can only decline Lieutenant Colonel Chen's good intentions. Lieutenant Colonel Chen blinked. Senior Colonel Meng has been here for half a year just for that research team? What kind of research is that? Oh, I misspoke. It's nothing. It's public anyway. It's just that I'm not a professional, so it's a bit hard to say. From what I've heard, they're mainly engaged in comparative research of the aberrated ecosphere. Their main focus is on the similarities and differences of the wilderness ecology between Spring City and Xia City. Lieutenant Colonel Chen had been grinding in the wilderness for many years, so he had some understanding. Oh, I've heard of it. Right now, it's said that the ecosphere of Spring City and Xia City is rapidly converging. Yes, especially in the volcanic region southwest of Spring City. The ecosphere ruled by the Vulcan ants is like a kaleidoscope of aberrations. Whether it's the horizontal population size or the vertical evolution of aberrations, the rate of change is extremely high. Similar phenomena have appeared in the vicinity of Xia City. And recently, there's been frequent crustal movements on both sides. It's as if there's some kind of linkage. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's curiosity was piqued. Then, are there any conclusions from the research? Meng Tu was about to shake his head when he thought of the topic of the lecture not too long ago. He couldn't help but chuckle. Yes, there's a hole in my brain right now. I suspect that it's because of the migration of a new plane. A new plane? Yes, there's a plane similar to the Deep Blue World. It's like a wheel that's rolling over the space and time we're in. The back end is in Spring City and the front end is in Xia City. The briefing officially began as he spoke. This was a standard short meeting. The information had already been distributed in advance, listing nearly all the important clues. It included a large number of images and surveillance system records. The professionals already had a preliminary understanding of the situation by relying on this information. The non-professional leaders didn't need to explain in detail. They just needed to know the general outline and then make arrangements and clear the responsibilities. Because of this, the professionals only roughly combed through the sequence of events. Most of the information was hastily skimmed over. But some of the analysis was a bit more interesting. It can be determined that the suspect went all the way from the southwest direction of the wilderness outside the city to Spring City. He encountered the hunting squad of former City Defense Force Lieutenant Bao Hongliang at Huilong Ridge, 273 kilometers outside the city, and killed a chrysanthemum bug. According to Bao Hongliang's testimony, the suspect was wearing an exoskeleton armor at the time. It's suspected to be a modified version of the X-2 robot. And according to the clues provided by Senior Colonel Meng Tu of the East Asian Coast Defense Force's 1st Special Forces Brigade, an X-2 robot charged into the heart of the southwestern volcanic region at the end of last year. And the mode of use of its energy weapon is very similar to the one displayed on the chrysanthemum bug that was killed this time. The two are highly related. This proves that the suspect has been operating in and around Spring City for a very long time. At the same time, we also have to pay attention to the basic structural requirements of the exoskeleton armor. Even if the suspect's armor was privately modified, it would be very difficult for it to have a particularly extreme design. Based on conventional structural inference, after the suspect wore the exoskeleton, his figure would be similar to Bao Hongliang's, so his real figure would be a bit smaller. His height is estimated to be between 167 and 172 centimeters, and his weight wouldn't exceed 65 kilograms. He could be a thin man or he could be a woman. There would be obvious conflicts with the current image data. The suspect should have an accomplice with extremely high hacking skills. He should be able to erase most of the traces left in the surveillance system, and he could hack into the shuttle's control system to easily cut off the power. From the time frame of the operation, his goal is very clear. He is also very clear about the problems he will face in the process of robbing, and he has a clear solution. As he listened, Meng Tu couldn't help but laugh. You guys are holding this meeting with bad intentions. Lieutenant Colonel Chen smiled and didn't say anything. Cho Wei, however, said in a hoarse voice, Quantum Corporation can't get out of this no matter what. Lieutenant Colonel Chen grimaced when he heard these words. They really did hit the nail on the head. Practically at the same time the two burners made their comments, the direction of the meeting took a clear turn. It was just as the political official presiding over the meeting said, the robber's goal is very clear. He's going after Quantum Corporation. In other words, he robbed Quantum Corporation's goal. However, we really want to know what Quantum Corporation's goal is. The person in charge of Quantum Corporation in Spring City was a typical elite. He wore a well-ironed suit and sat in his seat without saying a word. The person in charge of the police force sat beside him. He was like a sniffer dog that had found a suspicious target, constantly sniffing around. Madame Ren Qi is a high-ranking medical staff of the Mutant Research and Treatment Center. Today is the only time she's taken sick leave in the past 6 months to return to Spring City for surgery. How did your esteemed company know of this beforehand and arrange for a shuttle to send 2 B-class powerhouses to take over the uterine fibroid she had removed? Someone coldly said, what an extraordinary interest. Low laughter could be heard in the conference room. The person in charge of Spring City of Quantum Corporation still had the face of an elite, but his face had unconsciously darkened. Then came the complaint of the director of the Mutant Research and Treatment Center. We've already asked Rinchi. She has no dealings with Quantum Corporation. She doesn't have any dealings with the people that appeared inside and outside of her surgery room. She has no impression whatsoever. I must say this is an extremely sensitive and impolite behavior. Following that, the questions from all over Spring City couldn't stop. What's the nature of that uterine fibroid? Does your esteemed company already have a new path in the field of mutant research? We need more detailed background information. Meng Tu and the other two hadn't said a word since the start of the meeting. However, just by listening to these people's crazy bombardment, they already felt that it was very lively. At this time, even the cautious Lieutenant Colonel Chen let go. He sighed. That suspect is definitely trying to attract attention from all sides. Otherwise, there's no reason for there to be no video data on the route into the city, but it's all over Compassion Hospital. He's really going all out against the subsidiary companies. As an elite of the military's Team AB, Meng Tu expressed his delight at this scene. Quantum Corporation making a fool of themselves and exposing their actions is probably the person's biggest goal other than the uterine fibroids. Evidently he succeeded. Speaking up to this point, Meng Tu was also somewhat surprised. Spring City has quite a lot of opinions about Quantum Corporation. It's very rare to see such a situation where everyone is attacking them. After all, Quantum Corporation and the capital power behind it had enormous influence all over the world. No matter how much they tossed and turned, they would still have to give them some face. It wasn't like now, where they were practically spitting in the face and treating the person in charge as a suspect. The corner of Lieutenant Colonel Chen's mouth twitched. It's Quantum Corporation's fault for overreacting. Now up there. He extended his hand and pointed upwards. I heard that Quantum Corporation directly deployed a private airship from outer space. It entered the atmosphere in half an hour and is now circling the airspace around Spring City. The mayor and our boss are all green in the face. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's boss was naturally the commander of Spring City's border defense forces. Quantum Corporation's actions were equivalent to offending both the military and political bigwigs of Spring City's local system. It was no wonder that everyone was attacking them. Meng Tu was truly shocked. That uterine fibroid. Could it be a sacred fetus? Before he finished speaking, he suddenly felt a slight difference in the light beside him. He subconsciously turned his head and looked through the window of the conference room. He saw that a part of Spring City's dazzling night scene had been suddenly hollowed out. Chapter 702. Under the dim light, Luonan gazed at the dark red flesh beneath the white gauze. Aside from his line of sight, there were also penetrating interference waves. He connected the external neuron to the virtual brain system's analytical capabilities to perform a comprehensive examination and analysis of the target he had obtained in the afternoon. For those who were completely ignorant, this was just a uterine fibroid that had just been removed from a patient's body. For Quantum Corporation and chiefly way behind the scenes, this was a collection and storage system that had already collected a large amount of special components of mutants. For Luonan, who controlled the external neuron and the virtual brain system, it was a technological crystallization from an unknown civilization. Its official name was the Night-Level Basic Implanted Biochemical Furnace. Behind it was an enormous system as vast as the seas. This was knowledge that could be researched for a lifetime. But before he could research it, he needed to cut off the little tail left behind by Li Wei. The conditional format lock and the possible remote positioning settings had to be completely wiped clean. This was the only way to avoid drawing Li Wei's attention back to Xia City. Luonan formally opened up the virtual work area, ready to take notes at any time. He adjusted the position of the white gauze to make sure that it wouldn't cause any interference. These small actions carried a bit of a ceremonial nature because what he was about to do was more or less a gamble. Luonan didn't know if the idea he had been mulling over for over 4 months could be considered foolproof. The airships hovering high in the sky were no laughing matter if something went wrong. Not to mention that Spring City had an extraordinary and 7 or 8 B-rank powerhouses. Even if they weren't all enemies, they were just for show. It would be enough to make him suffer. And it was precisely this situation that caused Luonan's heart to churn with excitement like lava. His rationality was still doing its best to display its effect. The excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters he secreted were like race cars on a crowded road. They fought to outdo each other, yet they formed a kind of dynamic equilibrium that wasn't chaotic in the slightest. Luonan was able to enjoy the pleasure brought by his hormones within this dynamic equilibrium, but he didn't fall into a dull and tasteless state of pure inhibition early on. It was an excellent state. He no longer hesitated. Lightning flashed in his brain, and his soul energy and the external neuron interfered with each other. Not only did they form interference waves, but they also made the wondrous creation that existed between the mind and the material extend out from the center of his brows. It turned into a living nerve that seemed to be a real thing, and it pierced straight through the dark red flesh tissue on the white gauze. Before the external neuron truly made contact, the flesh on the other side was already twitching under the interference wave that arrived in advance. Under the already uneven, dried blood clots and twisted blood vessels, there were even short tentacles extending out. They waved in the air for a while before their length increased. The extended external neuron accurately docked with one of the tentacles. From Luonan's point of view, this was quite a disgusting scene. However, in terms of actual effects, the external neuron that made physical contact with the target would undoubtedly increase the force it exerted on the flesh and blood tissues by 10 or even 100 times. In the virtual brain's interface, the progress of the biochemical reactor's analysis practically climbed to 100% in an instant. During this time, familiar system information such as, the culture room has been filled with XXX all-round stem cells. XXX type culture medium has been set. There were also warning windows that popped up one after another that said, the equipment is at 9% integrity. It no longer possesses the ability to self-destruct. There is a risk of biochemical contamination. They all looked very familiar. It was practically carved out of the same mold as the self-destructing reactor. In fact, Luonan really did suspect that these two reactor wreckage were used as collectors. They were the result of some sort of fission proliferation. This was just a guess for now. It wasn't a difficulty that he needed to overcome. The true problem lay in the fact that the external neuron had completely docked with the flesh and blood tissues. This clearly violated the conditional format lock that Li Wei had set up. Therefore, the system information that continuously refreshed also popped up one after another: self-destruct, contamination, reboot, and other words that made one's eyelids twitch. However, the external neuron, which had already achieved a physical docking, displayed a powerful interference power right now. It invaded this mass of flesh and blood tissues in reverse. The relatively simple neuron structure split into large amounts of roots in the shortest amount of time. The roots warped and even directly replaced the original blood vessels and nerves within the flesh and blood tissues. This allowed Luonan to realize direct control to the greatest degree. Perhaps the collection and storage system that Li Wei had designed wouldn't be so easily breached, but the problem was that it was currently in an offline hibernation state. Luonan had been accumulating power for this, so he easily achieved the desired effect. Luonan also knew that this was very likely only a temporary advantage. He had yet to carry out fundamental changes to this mass of flesh and blood from the bottom up. Therefore, Luonan didn't delay at all. After the external neuron obtained absolute dominance, a process that had been rehearsed countless times on the program level was launched. A mass of dazzling brilliance shone. It constantly changed shape and contour of electricity. The external neuron acted as a pathway, and it instantly injected into the flesh and blood tissues. In other words, it was the remains of the biochemical reactor. This was the Jianghu soul light seed. Luonan already knew from the virtual brain system's response that a certain natural connection existed between the Jianghu soul light seed and the biochemical reactor. Once they truly intersected, an astonishing reaction would certainly occur. Luonan hadn't been in a hurry to advance this process. Instead, he had spent 4 months of time to make all the preparations he could. He had borrowed the enormous database of the virtual brain system to read through all the relevant information and blueprints. He had buried his head in the complex and deep system. Though he could only skim the surface, the time had come. Now was the time to perform practical verification. On the virtual brain's visual interface, the Jianghu soul light seed, located at the end of the Wraith sign system, had already fallen off. It brought along its corresponding database and merged into the biochemical reactor's small planet. After merging, the analysis progress of the two was reset to 0 at the same time. Then it started all over again. The speed was very fast, breaking through 20% in the blink of an eye. The system information refreshed at this time, and it began to break free from those boring repetitions. Equipment integrity at 9%. XXX full functional stem cells are undergoing uncontrolled differentiation. The base material has been damaged. A new tinder has been detected. Inspecting the internal layout of the furnace. No corresponding layout method has been found. Searching for the preset layout structure of the system? The electromagnetic department's common layout method. Coincidence rate 97%. Adjustable. Then a warning pop-up window popped out. Do you want to inject a new tinder? Warning. Once injected, it will automatically adjust according to the common layout method. The base material formula needs to be adjusted accordingly. Luonan didn't even blink. He simply chose yes. The flesh and blood tissue on the white gauze clearly swelled up at this moment. And on the virtual brains interface, the reactor had already completely absorbed the database of the Jianghu Soul Light Seed. The corresponding interface had changed somewhat. From Luonan's perspective, the internal structure diagram that appeared right now was very much like a round drum furnace body. It even had a bit of the fanciful style of the legendary Old Lord's pill refining furnace. It was just that the complex dynamic distribution of the system of point masses inside was much more difficult than starting a fire to refine pills. The point masses endlessly changed their positions under the effects of internal and external forces. The point masses also changed the forces acting on each other. They formed the configuration module that Luonan had been researching all this time for nearly half a year. The accumulation of energy grew thicker and thicker. This was the so-called general layout method of the Department of Electromagnetism, the legendary Tinder. Luonan already had a general understanding of the related concepts after several months of study. He didn't stubbornly dig into the definition. Instead, he drew a few strokes on the virtual work area, forming a vague human silhouette. In that unknown civilization, people can construct a kind of framework that surpasses ordinary life forms. It is the fundamental configuration that runs through the structure of the human body and soul. The user manual calls it a furnace. Its function is to produce an unending stream of higher-level life materials. Some sort of extraordinary gene golden cell. And on this basis, the mortal body is replaced, life is reformed, and life is realized all the way to transcend the level of life. This was the my heart like a furnace. Luonan drew a circle on the chest and abdomen of the vague human silhouette, representing the fundamental configuration of the furnace. Then he drew a small circle to the side, representing some sort of cheat code. The furnace was supposed to be the core construction of one's body and soul. It didn't rely on external objects for its own needs. But in the end, that unknown civilization was able to realize the simulation of this special configuration, to the point of mass production. This was the flesh and blood tissue before Luonan's eyes. It was the remains of a biochemical reactor. Compared to its own furnace, the original intention of the biochemical reactor was to act as an auxiliary and insurance for a second heart. It stored the host's golden cell and used external energy to rapidly carry out cell differentiation and tissue repair when the host suffered heavy damage, giving the host a second life. However, it was just like many inventions. The original intention and development of the product would always deviate more or less. What was originally an auxiliary might become a dominant one. But whether it was an auxiliary or a dominant one, the biochemical reactor's functions weren't born out of thin air. The Jianghu Soul Light Seed filled it with the core logic of its construction. Luonan had already gathered the raw materials needed for the basic base material formula before he took action. Now it was just a problem of energy injection. It needed energy, especially since the furnace body had suffered damage as high as 91%. The remaining portion had even suffered contamination and modifications. In order to restore it to its complete form, it needed to use the base material to divide and multiply according to the blueprint. This set of processes required an enormous amount of energy. In the beginning, Luonan used the continuous transformation of the body and soul coupling interference power to charge the biochemical reactor. But this was a transformation of mass and energy. The interference on the mental plane made it different from the pure laws of physics. Luonan had a thick accumulation on the mental plane. He could also use the storm turbulence of the abyss region. He could even use the prepared base material raw material to generate a reaction, reducing a large portion of energy consumption. But after this wave, he had a guilty conscience, as if a large hole had been opened at the bottom of the pond. He didn't know how much longer he could last. Luckily, Luonan had made preparations early on. He chose a temporary place to stay, an energy center that provided the city's CBD area. Just when he felt that his strength was lacking, the external neurons split off a side branch and pierced into the energy transmission system. The external neurons skillfully acted as an electric mouse, carrying out another wave of transformation. The efficiency of the electrical energy conversion was quite low. Fortunately, there was an endless stream of energy. Chapter 703. The Jintong Soul Light Seed was the tinder within the furnace. It was the core logic of the operation. From a purely theoretical perspective, Luonan could criticize this logic for not being strict enough. If he wanted to use it, he actually needed the system to correct it. But on the plane of reality, the Soul Light Seed was still the projection of Jintong's life imprint. It was undoubtedly of the extraordinary level in terms of the level of energy manipulation. When it was started and operated, the electricity consumption of the electric mouse really couldn't be satisfied. Not to mention that there was the wreckage of the biochemical reactor behind it, crying piteously for food. Speaking of the biochemical reactor, there was a question. What kind of design could be placed within an object with a cross-section diameter of 3 centimeters? From the level of science and technology on Earth, a silicon anvil of the same volume could be divided into roughly 30 wafers. Each wafer could be arranged with hundreds of billions of field effect tubes, sealing them into a precision chip that was impossible to lack in modern society. With the chip as the core, it could handle an enormous flow of information that far exceeded the limits of the human brain by 1,000 times. It looked like it could do many things, right? But if the chip wasn't given any supporting hardware equipment, its effectiveness wouldn't even be as good as a stack of potato chips of the same size. Returning to the field of life science, such a volume was slightly larger than a human eyeball. Its pure volume was close to that of a thyroid gland, and it was a third the size of a gallbladder. Such an organ in the human body generally only had one or two main functions, and those functions needed to be displayed within the context of the human body's larger system. In the end, any equipment needed to display its function in order to see the system and environment it existed in. At best, there was a high or low degree of dependence. However, this set of theory was a bit unsuitable when applied to the biochemical reactor manufactured by an unknown civilization. This marvelous creation was like a living flesh and blood. It had an astonishing technological foundation and designed to realize a set of complex functions and outputs. From the information Luonan obtained from the Virtual Brain Systems database, a complete night-level basic implantation biochemical reactor was in itself a production line for the proliferation, modification, and processing of stem cells. It gathered the cultivation, differentiation, and modification of all-round stem cells in one body. It used a tinder as its operating core, and through the proliferation of stem cells as a base material, it could realize the repair, remodeling, and strengthening of over 95% of the body's organs. It could even temporarily realize stimulating biochemical modifications. In order to realize these functions, a total of 6 large and small functional divisions were integrated in an area the size of a human eyeball. Their duties were clear, and they cooperated with each other to form a miniature, tight, and comprehensive stem cell processing plant. Without a doubt, this was a little thing that could drive all the biologists, chemists, and physicists on Earth crazy. Even in the unknown civilization presented by the virtual brain system, it was still a relatively advanced technology. The problem was that in order to activate the small factory and realize the incessant fission and proliferation of full-function stem cells, an astronomical amount of energy was required. In an unknown civilization, the night-grade basic implantation biochemical reactor had to be equipped with a set of miniature energy cores. The technical difficulty of this energy core was no less than that of the furnace itself. It consumed special high-energy fuel to generate sufficient energy, and together with the energy output of the powerful host itself, it propelled the furnace to operate. And right now, Luonan was temporarily unable to provide this set of miniature energy cores. He was even more unable to find the corresponding high-energy fuel. He could only use his own soul strength to interfere with the abyss region and the material plane. He could use the electrical system on Earth to ensure the corresponding energy support. Ignition was just an insignificant beginning. When the tinder burned fiercely in the furnace, the speed of energy consumption instantly crossed a dangerous limit. The power transmission line of the energy center simply collapsed. Fortunately, the external neuron was in the middle. This marvelous creation existed in the ambiguous zone between the mental and the material. It operated spontaneously according to some rule, using its special mode of existence to replace the power transmission line. It was directly erected between the small reactor and the biochemical reactor at the bottom of the energy center, connecting seamlessly. With this buffer, Luonan was able to see the tinder burning fiercely within the furnace. He saw the furnace rapidly expand the scale of its environmental effect. He also saw the raw materials he had thrown in, including the somatic cells he had collected from his own body, realized that initialization, under this kind of environment, induce and transform the cells into all-round stem cells. Then came the rapid fission and proliferation. The single cells, under the catalysis of the endless supply of energy and the unceasing influx of nutrients, quickly took the shape of a flesh and blood creation with initial effects. It first completed the self-renewal of the furnace body, replacing the already contaminated remains of the reactor. It used the fastest speed to add a new environment for the tinder. Afterwards, it followed the established design diagram, endlessly supplementing and perfecting the proper functional division, allowing this miniature factory to enter the fast lane of turnover. Correspondingly, the biochemical reactor plundered the electrical energy of the energy center in an even more direct and unbridled manner. The scorching electricity seemed to pierce through the air at this moment. It danced wildly and crisscrossed in the void, converging from many directions. Luonan, who was at the center of the convergence of electricity, seemed like he could turn into charcoal at any time. But in reality, these thrusting electricity passed through the superconducting circuits erected in the void, directly entering the embryonic form of the biochemical reactor's reconstruction. Luonan seemed to be in danger, but he was actually safe. Just from a technical perspective. In a certain sense, the biochemical reactor was a new organ that grew outside of Luonan's body. But the minute changes inside had long since exceeded the precision limit of Luonan's mental senses. It was impossible for the current Luonan to dig up the details behind the proliferation of the reactor's main body. He could only refer to the design diagram in the database to deduce the current progress. The progress was much faster than he had imagined, but the resulting impact and consequences were far beyond his expectations. He knew that there was a problem with the power supply of the energy center to the surrounding area. There was a huge problem. Unless Quantum Corporation was completely blind, there was no reason for them not to see it. But he couldn't help but rejoice that he chose the right place to settle down. There were many shopping malls on this side of the central business district. There was no lack of nutrient substances and culture media. Don't look at them as ordinary toys. If one were to strictly follow the laws of mass and energy conversion, the difference in energy consumption would be an astronomical figure. Luonan swept up the goods in a frenzy after his successful robbery. Reality proved that his judgment was correct. The only mistake was that he consumed an entire night's supply in a short few minutes. Ruiwen, who was standing guard outside, walked in. She didn't say anything. But Luonan knew what she meant. Right now was indeed a critical moment. The airship of Quantum Corporation in the sky had already responded. They directly dropped down 2 Deep Blue squads, a total of 15 Deep Blue walkers. There were 3 B-rank powers among them. Even with Quantum Corporation's resources, this was probably the greatest force they could muster in the shortest amount of time. But Luonan's actions in the heart of Spring City caused several powerful people in the city to express their attention. There was an extraordinary among them, and he was of the mental side. The pressure he gave off was even greater. Even though it's still a bit lacking. Let's go. Luonan spat out a turbid breath and slowly took a step forward. And the biochemical reactor that was connected to the external neuron also felt some sort of pull. It moved closer to his position. When the distance between the two crossed a certain boundary, the mass of flesh and blood that was undergoing reconstruction suddenly expanded into a flesh membrane. It covered Luonan's head and face, and the crisscrossing electricity that filled the air gathered together. Luonan let out a muffled groan, and a layer of flesh and fascia that seemed to have just grown rapidly spread out between the gaps of the exoskeleton armor that Luonan wore. The thickness of the membrane varied, and there were structures similar to blood vessels and nerves running through it. They were even exposed to the outside. They interweaved and blended together with the exoskeleton, drawing in dazzling electricity. The electricity flowed around Luonan's body, naturally forming a unique structure of surging and circulating electricity. It was said to be natural, but this structure was actually pieced together layer by layer in strict accordance with the relevant blueprints. Luonan received the stimulation of special information, and the key module that had always been hidden within the visor of his helmet, the divine binding hoop seized from Jin Tong, rose up from beneath Luonan's neck like a metal coil that streaked across an electric circuit. The opening of the hoop slightly expanded, drawing in the endlessly stretching fascia and blood vessels, and even the visible and invisible flames of electricity. The hoop streaked across Luonan's face to his forehead, and then it slightly contracted, just so happening to be stuck on Luonan's forehead. The newly formed fascia and blood vessels, along with the visible flames of electricity, stuck to Luo Nan's head. Only then did the visor of his helmet close. Psychological and physiological stimulation mixed together, forming a trembling feeling that could not be distinguished between hot and cold. It was instantly transmitted to every corner of Luo Nan's limbs and bones, reaching all the way to the ends of his body. It even extended to the void outside of his body, forming a faintly discernible path with the surging and raging flames of electricity in the surroundings. Luo Nan's will was guided inside without a doubt. Luo Nan was at a close distance, or perhaps it could be said that there was zero distance between him and the terrifying energy that was enough to turn him into ashes. Under such circumstances, no misdirection or deviation was permitted. If Luo Nan were to directly stir things up without any preparation, then even 10 or 100 Luo Nans would die. At this time, the true value of Luo Nan's 4 months of patience and preparation was reflected. He had already read and studied the spiritual light seed of Jin Tong. It could be said that he had learned the relevant knowledge of the general layout structure of the electromagnetism department. He had grasped the exquisite configuration that could be applied to a berserk electromagnetic environment. Well, Luo Nan's understanding and application of this configuration was at least 2 levels lower than the condensation ring. But at this very moment, it was enough under these circumstances. Plus, he still had the divine binding hoop. The light restraint on Luo Nan's forehead gave him a clear texture. And the virtual brain's interface completely reflected Luo Nan's current body, the fission and proliferation of flesh and blood tissues, and the exoskeleton armor that had been designed and modified long ago. This was the initial construction of a body and soul structure that was suitable for controlling the berserk electromagnetic power. Chapter 704. Report the latest situation in the Abyss Zone. Storm Intensity Level 4. No source of interference found. I repeat, no source of interference found. The frontline commander of this operation, the captain of the forest team Yuan Mu, confirmed the information with the airship again. The conclusion that entered his ears was like a fat worm covered in burrs that crawled into his brain from his ear canal. It made his facial nerves twitch with a dull pain. The face behind the metal visor probably had a toothache. Yuan Mu subconsciously clenched his teeth. Please convert the storm's influence to the standard unit of interference in the Abyss Zone. No source of interference found. Unable to convert. Just give me a rough range. No source of interference found. Don't you King understand human language? The sudden rise in anger probably frightened the observer on the other side. The other side was silent for a full 10 seconds. Seeing that the destination was right in front of them, the observer replied. If there is indeed a source of interference in the storm, the predicted value is between 5 dg and 15 dg. Not extreme value? Not extreme value. Duration. It has already exceeded 200 seconds. Yuan Mu listened quietly. On the other side, the captain of the Mars team, Spot of Light, sighed and cut to the chase. Crushing, 601, and 1501, also kneeling. According to the Abyss Zone Effectiveness Verification Standard of the Inner World, in the absence of obvious interference, the power projected into the Abyss Zone reached or approached 1 standard unit, 1 dg, and maintained a relative stability for 60 seconds. Maintaining a relative stability for 15 seconds under the impact of a combat level, with a lower limit of no less than 0. 1 standard unit, one could be considered a first-rate psychic ability user and could firmly stand among the ranks of rank B. Industry insiders simplified it to 2 code names, 601 and 1501. In fact, among rank B psychics, there were only a dozen or so people who could instantly exceed the limit of power projected to 5 dg. And to maintain this interference force for more than 3 minutes, one could only consider it within the range of extraordinaries. As for increasing it by 3 times, just the thought of it made the fat worm in his ear canal writhe even more violently. It was no wonder that the observer on the airship didn't dare to make such a judgment. The chaotic situation without any source of interference was one thing, but the value that came out of the conversion was beyond reason, which was the most fatal. At this moment, the 2 Deep Blue teams that had descended rapidly from the flying ship had a total of 15 Deep Blue walkers. They had activated their low-altitude maglev thrusters and were gliding noiselessly between the forest of tall buildings. The central CBD area in the north of Spring City was shrouded in darkness. The hundreds of tall buildings were like pillars of smoke painted on the night sky, and the scattered lights that were embellished came from the electronic and lighting equipment of the citizens trapped in this area. In this area, there would be nearly 1 million people every night. With the sudden power outage, the citizens were inevitably in chaos, especially after the backup power supply had a problem. In the face of the rare pitch-black night scene, the calls to the police were flying everywhere, causing the surrounding public security personnel to be overwhelmed. The restless heat spread in the darkness, but just like the chaos windstorm in the Abyss Zone, the center could not be seen at all, and the beginning and end could not be found. The current situation was too strange. The detection equipment of all parties could confirm that a serious accident suspected to have occurred in the energy center that supplied the daily electricity of the CBD area. The electricity produced and converted by the small reactor had leaked out in large quantities, so much so that many lines had been damaged. The energy current that had been forcibly seized did not run too far away, but instead converged in the energy center area, maintaining a high rate of consumption. According to normal logic, this should be someone or some people using the abundant energy in the energy center to drive some equipment. There were many possibilities if one were to consider it from the realm of extraordinary. But all of this became absurd with the huge amount of electricity that far exceeded the norm, and the use of ultra-high power. If the energy center was an extremely high overdraft card, then this card was about to be maxed out. The problem was that no one knew where the POS machine was. The two teams of Deep Blue Walkers could only listen to the judgment of the staff and head towards the designated probability area. In fact, it was a circle drawn with the energy center as the origin. With such information support, in addition to the instant death of the B-rank spiritual type Lan Xiang, and the clueless chaos windstorm in the Abyss Zone, it caused the battle-hardened Captain Yuanmu to adopt an extremely conservative attitude towards this mission. When the metal outer armor of his feet touched the outer wall of the energy center building, Yuanmu once again asked the Airship Command Center, "Have there been any new discoveries from the Ability User Association?" After a few seconds, the observer returned with an unsurprising answer, "No." Then are we fighting with the ghosts of the Abyss Zone? Or the kind that can control thunder and lightning? The light spot made a joke that was not funny at all. At the very least, few of the 15 members of the two squads, Forest and Fluorescence, plus the 100 or so staff members in the command center of the airship could laugh. At this moment, the two teams landed on the energy center building in succession. It seemed that the only good thing about this place was that it was an office area. At present, they had already gotten off work and there were only a few people on duty. Moreover, they had already obeyed orders from above to evacuate in time. At least there would be a relatively spacious battlefield if they really encountered any troublesome ghosts, lightning-swallowing aberrations and the like. Spot of Light was still letting his imagination run wild. Maybe we found an aberration that likes to drink electricity. That bro just had a full meal. What I mean is, it's really hard to imagine that a strong person who just completed a perfect robbery would stay in Spring City until now, and even use this kind of method to lure us all here. Yuanmu calmly said, "Deep Blue has confirmed that the lost item is still in Spring City. What about the exact location? Also, do you want to confirm it again?" Yuanmu fell silent again. This was like facing the stormy weather of the Abyss Zone. He knew that there was definitely a problem, but he could not find the root cause no matter what. In fact, Spot of Light also knew that as operation members, they should not worry about these general issues. They were only weapons, not brains. Complaining and mocking was only to let the other team members understand the danger and severity of the situation. Next, the two captains began to discuss the specific operation plan. Should we split up? How many numbers do you have in the Abyss Zone? I'm not a psychic. Other than Oak, there's no one here who's psychic. Alright, about 0. 2. If everyone plays with domains, we can occasionally reach the 5 DG limit. It's about the same on my side. Oak may be psychic, but he's more defensive. His limit is about 1. Understood. We'll follow your lead. The two captains quickly reached a consensus. The greatest advantage of the Deep Blue Walker system was that they could rely on the format of fire to build a format space and effectively display their collective strength. They could fuse the strength of several or even dozens of people into a furnace, until they could achieve a powerful power that was close to an extraordinary domain. In the current situation, gathering as much strength as possible was indeed the most reasonable choice. During the process of discussion, the two captains conveniently revised their route of advance. They still maintained a sharp and clear advancing speed, and at the same time roughly understood the basic structure of the format space. The opponent can instantly kill a blue dragon from a distance. There's a 90% chance that he's psychic. Right now, our intelligence isn't good enough, so it's hard to have a preemptive strike. Therefore, before and after encountering the enemy, defense at the mental level is of utmost importance. Oak, the initial format link will center around you. Resist the first wave. Yes. A muffled voice rang out. It was a short word, but it gave off a rather slow and sluggish feeling. This was Oak, a large man that was 2 meters tall. After wearing the special exoskeleton armor, his height neared 7 meters. He was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Compared to the other deep blue walkers, he seemed more like a cumbersome machine. But aside from the 2 captains, he was another B-rank powerhouse. Moreover, he was an extremely rare burner that leaned towards the psychic side. The format domain of the 15 deep blue walkers was completed as they advanced. Under the resonance of the archetype format, the format of fire of the 15 people seemed to fuse into one. Every participant was a fulcrum that opened up a bizarre space that spanned across the material and mental planes. Oak was the core pillar within this space, just as Yuanmu had arranged it. But the others weren't simply energy providers. They maintained a clear and meticulous division of responsibilities. Although they were scattered and running, it was more like they were steering an invisible mothership. Through organic cooperation, the 15 people were integrated together. Speckled encouraged everyone, "Let's go." Format Space 7.0. On the deep blue platform, the official name of this domain was still the format space. Now that it was in its 7th major version, the performance of each version would have a clear increase. In this latest version, the changes had only lasted for a little over 2 months. Only the 2 top teams, Forest and Mars, had completed their upgrades and the corresponding training and adaptation work. This was a completely different experience from the previous version. "Thank you, Professor Luo." The more nervous he was, the more Speckled talked, forming a sharp contrast with Yuanmu on the other side. This was probably the biggest obstacle for the 2 teams to break in. 2 minutes later, the deep blue walkers had already passed through the surface of the energy center building and entered the core work area where the small reactor was installed. In the meantime, Yuanmu and the airship command center had conducted a few exchanges, but to no avail. "We're like an expedition team thrown into a tomb." Speckled mumbled as he used the night vision goggles to observe the surrounding environment. He quickly discovered another problem. "Isn't this place too dark?" "It's too dark," Yuanmu said at almost the same time. The other members also gave feedback on this problem. No matter how the night vision goggles adjusted their mode and parameters, it was very difficult to clearly image the surrounding environment. Chapter 705. A few seconds later, the command center contacted Yuanmu and said that there was a problem in the area the operation team was in. The observer lady said, "According to the blueprints, the nearby walls are made of special materials such as electromagnetic shielding cement, which limits the electromagnetic activity in the relevant area. If we go deeper, communication might be blocked, and EMP-type electromagnetic weapons will also be restricted." Yuanmu and Spot of Light looked at each other. In the dimming light, they could barely see each other's cold metal visors. In such an environment, Yuanmu subconsciously pressed on the communication module, trying to use external force to make the conversation smoother. "Listen, I've worked with conductive cement before. This thing is really useful, but it's not a material that completely absorbs. It should reflect and refract, do you understand?" The problem now is that we can't see anything even if we use night vision equipment. Including your conclusion, visible light, infrared, and perhaps a wider range of electromagnetic waves are all lacking in our area. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened. Under normal circumstances, the environment that humans lived in should be a pot of boiling soup where radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays of different frequencies, wavelengths, and energy levels were intertwined and stirred. Some had more, some had less, and when they met with matter, they would pass through, refract, or be absorbed. Humans were bombarded by electromagnetic waves all the time, and had already adapted and actively used this environment as an important way of perceiving the world. And now, the situation that the Deep Blue Team, Forest and Fluorescence were facing was that the closer they got to the reactor, the thinner the electromagnetic waves became, to the point that some layers had even formed a continuous void. This was not a natural phenomenon, nor was it a reasonable interference phenomenon. A monster that swallows electricity. Spot of Light was not in the mood for a long explanation, and only emphasized the key words before turning to the only person in the team who was psychic. Oak, give an answer, even a guess is fine. Oak had been trying to do a more detailed exploration of the surrounding environment, and the formatted space had given him a lot of support. At least, he could reach from the abyss to the electromagnetic environment on the material plane. This was a shocking breadth, but it was not easy to get a clear answer. He was silent for more than 10 seconds, and then suddenly went against the tactical order, and turned on the headlamp on his helmet. The blinding light tore through the darkness and headed straight for the end of the tunnel. Fortunately, the sensitivity of the instrument was extremely high, and the parameters were automatically adjusted, so the tragedy of a group of people suddenly became real blind was avoided. Oak. As soon as Yuan Mu's rebuke was heard, the sudden increase in the brightness of the outside world decreased at a visible rate. In the eyes of the members of the operation team, the darkness was like a virus that spread wantonly, killing every single photon in the air. It even swarmed to the light source on Oak's forehead, and after a few breaths, there was only a faint cold light coming from there, and it was quickly dimming. Under the dim light, everyone was silent. Oak then said, "Electromagnetic waves are matter and also energy. Energy and matter will not disappear into thin air." Rather than saying that it was an answer or a guess, it was more like a rule of the normal world. This rule was very strict. Even if it seemed to be on the verge of collapse under the impact of extraordinary powers, it could still limit the change of all things in the world. If the actual situation seemed to deviate from it, then the basic direction was clear. And Oak's experiment showed that the actual situation was much more violent and intense than previously imagined. The two captains looked at each other again, and simultaneously thought of a significant change on another level. Abyssal storm? Yuan Mu stated his basic guess, and Spot had the courage to show his imagination. That is to say, this is probably a reverse interference. The electricity that leaked out, including most of the electromagnetic waves in this area, was transferred to the abyssal area through a certain channel, forming that storm. The monster that swallowed electricity doesn't exist, or rather, its stomach is in the abyssal area. Yuan Mu frowned. Why? Do we need him to show us the relevant paper? Spot directly turned off the night vision goggles. It was meaningless to turn on the equipment in such an environment. He would rather believe in the well-tempered format of fire and the formatted space built on that foundation. Yuan Mu soon realized that it was pointless to get to the bottom of it. The spreading darkness was just a byproduct, a hole formed by stripping the ubiquitous electromagnetic waves from the side of the body. The truly terrifying enemy was still in the depths of the darkness. So he quickly ordered, switch to pure sensory mode. Oak, activate sensory sharing. Fortress detection module will be activated in 10 seconds. After giving the order, Yuan Mu thought of Oak's previous extreme behavior, which was obviously different from usual. He also knew that as a psychic, Oak was under more pressure than the others. After hesitating for a moment, he asked in private, "Can you hold on?" Oak did not directly respond but simply carried out the order. Soon, the eyes of the team members lit up again, and the sensory results were reconstructed according to the information integration mode they were used to, temporarily freeing them from the predicament of being blind. But with the corresponding increase in consumption, their resistance to psychic attacks would also decrease. There was a high chance that when facing a psychic enemy, they would have to cut themselves. That was a compromise to reality. No commander would be willing to make such a decision. Yuan Mu could only try to calm himself down and re-examine the situation in the formatted space. At that moment, one of the team members finally couldn't take it anymore and spoke in the tactical channel. "If we're also a source of radiation, does that mean we're being absorbed too?" The silence persisted for about 5 seconds. Spot chuckled. "Perhaps. Right now, we've already entered a certain gentleman's domain. A person who can control light. How should I express this? Electromagnetic domain? Light Rider?" The exoskeleton armor's communication module issued a warning as soon as he finished speaking, indicating that communication with the outside world had been seriously affected. In the next second, the two teams' communication with the airship's command center was cut off. Yuan Mu was just about to try to rouse the team's morale when he heard Oak's muffled groan. Then came a pure and direct attack from the psychic plane. The erected sensory network immediately collapsed. 15 deep blue walkers were suddenly thrown onto the isolated island. What greeted them was a wave of stifling darkness. Chapter 706. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. Even an experienced first-line commander like Yuan Mu couldn't make an accurate and comprehensive judgment of the current situation in a short second. Therefore, he could only choose to apply the established paradigm: Barker's defense. The so-called Barker's defense was the basic paradigm of defending and counterattacking in response to the simultaneous arrival of mental attacks and electromagnetic interference. After giving the order, Yuan Mu fully ignited his own format of fire. He replaced the reckless oak who had been attacked head-on and became the perceptual core of the entire formatted space. Formatted Space version 7.0. The format of fire of the 15 deep blue walkers and their corresponding energies formed a special space similar to a flying ship. Everyone had a specific position that could be adjusted at any time to form a joint force and construct a powerful offensive and defensive module. This kind of combination was actually beyond one's intuition. Even if everyone was well trained, they would only be able to truly master it in the last 2 or 3 weeks. As the captain, Yuan Mu's degree of mastery over this form was a cut above everyone else's. Right now he was like a captain piloting a flying ship through a fierce and surging storm, doing his best to maintain the ship's balance. This was hard work, but Yuan Mu's mind was roused. His judgment wasn't wrong. Yuan Mu guided and operated the format of fire to capture a substantial attack in the boundless darkness. This also caused the structure of the formatted space to automatically adjust and contract, forming an even more stable defense. It maintained a state of harmony under the attack and waited for an opportunity to act. At the same time, Yuan Mu also felt that the black tide that was pouncing towards him actually didn't have a clear distinction between the mental and the material plane. It was very difficult to categorize it. It was indeed like a storm in the night. No one could tell whether the droplets that struck their bodies were ordinary water droplets or highly corrosive acid before they received further damage. The space constructed by the format of fire was currently resisting the pure force of the attack. As for the deeper ones, brilliant electric fire suddenly exploded in the darkness. The twisted and forked rays of light were like stiff demonic claws, rolling up the surrounding shadows on the walls and slashing over. The scene was sinister and terrifying, but Yuan Mu's mind suddenly relaxed. His judgment was correct again. The Barker's defense already utilized the exoskeleton armor in conjunction with the format of fire structure that was preset within the dynamo core to form an equipotential shield on the surface of every person's body. Yuan Mu vaguely felt a sinister and ice-cold power. It was like the previously harmless electronic wind that had cut into him. Only this time there was no follow-up attack. The silence grew increasingly sharp. Yes, that person was observing. It was as if he could directly observe the activity of their brains. He could see through their trembling and fear. At least in Yuan Mu's case, he felt as if his own skull had been flipped open. Every layer of cortex, every nerve, the bioelectricity transmitted, and even the information they carried were all exposed to the other party's open and above-board observation. This was a maddening thought. It was also a challenge to the limits of his willpower. If possible, Yuan Mu would certainly explode with the format of fire and incinerate everything around him. However, he was already powerless to do anything. The difference between the levels of the two was too great. At this very moment, Yuan Mu's mind had already placed this enemy on the level of an extraordinary. Moreover, it was a natural enemy that had an extremely strong restraining effect on the deep blue walkers. Wait. Yuan Mu suddenly understood. No wonder the Barker-style defense was useless. For a natural enemy, the electromagnetic field was just a carrier of extraordinary power. The opposite was also true. The electromagnetic field. The mental side. These two key pieces of information were combined together. They were sufficiently mixed and interfered with each other. This was undoubtedly the nightmare of Earth's current technological side. The core of the deep blue walkers was admittedly the burner, but the platform they used to display their abilities was a technological side product. Under the control of the electromagnetic field, the deep blue walkers were simply like toys that could be tossed about. Natural enemy. The corner of Yuan Mu's mouth twitched. A feeling of exhaustion surged up, transforming into a tide of darkness. It drowned his entire body, halting his nearly despairing train of thought. Oh my, it's finally over. Luonan let out a long breath as he walked along the pitch-black corridor. Due to these slight vibrations, the layer of skin and tendons that adhered to his body suddenly turned into flying ash. There were even specks of sparks falling in between. The high-voltage electric current that passed through here captured the closest good conductor. It looked as if it was about to backfire. The soul-binding hoop hummed and trembled, effectively restraining the operation of the electromagnetic field. It diverted the powerful electric current that could injure Luo Nan into the void. The electric current collided with the storm in the abyss and dissipated into nothingness. Good stuff. Luo Nan still didn't know where Jin Tong obtained this piece of equipment. But as far as the virtual brain system was concerned, the soul-binding hoop was indeed one of the most suitable equipment for ability users of the mental side. It was especially effective in the aspect of electromagnetic and supernatural powers. Jin Tong's being able to obtain this piece of equipment was indeed a great fortune. But he had actually become a fleshly body. Luo Nan really didn't understand what sort of twists and turns were going on inside. Unfortunately, ordinary base materials were simply unable to withstand the pressure of an extraordinary. The biochemical reactor was a product that consumed a lot of energy. He was able to display it to his heart's content for a few dozen seconds at best before it turned into flying ash and smoke. Luo Nan finally understood why Chief Li Wei would spend so much time and effort to gather the raw materials required for the advanced formula. This restriction, as well as the bright prospects that could be touched upon, made Luo Nan a bit excited, let alone Li Wei. It could be imagined that if the advanced formula was used in the biochemical reactor to burn and forge materials with a bearing capacity of 3 to 5 times that of ordinary base materials, the success rate of the hunting operation in the cloud world would increase to over 60% at the very least. But looking at it from a realistic point of view, this didn't seem to be any easier than hunting Gong Qi himself. Luo Nan let out a breath and took off the exoskeleton armor, which was already a bit deformed. This toy was basically unusable. But it couldn't be carelessly thrown away. Otherwise it might reveal some clues. Fortunately, it was a lightweight piece of equipment. A slightly larger suitcase was enough to hold it. After a bit of packing, Luo Nan called out, "Rui Wen." The little girl appeared noiselessly beside him. She pressed down on the suitcase, then she disappeared. She should be at the forward operating base 500 kilometers away when she reappeared. There's no need to be anxious. Luo Nan seized the time to remind her. Rui Wen certainly consumed energy to travel through space. Though she had never complained of being tired, it was hard for others to guess where her limits were. Luo Nan wasn't willing to challenge this, so he gave Rui Wen ample time to adjust. Luo Nan took advantage of the current electromagnetic interference that was still present. All the sensing equipment was limited and he slowly walked out of the energy center building. He seamlessly joined the stream of people cursing and fumbling within the pitch-black night. It wasn't easy for him to complete the experiment, but all the materials were gray. All he heard was a sound. Fortunately, he wasn't completely without harvests. At the very least, he understood that it wasn't easy to control the electromagnetic configuration. He was still far from being able to do as he pleased. He could only follow the few simple paradigms presented by the virtual brain system. He imitated them and tried to combine them. He still needed a lot of practice if he really wanted to use it in actual combat against an extraordinary like Gong Qi. The problem was that the base materials had become consumables. This was something that burned money. Oh, it wasn't like there was no way to solve this problem. Chapter 707. Luo Nan walked briskly on the main street. He was surrounded by a bustling stream of people. Everyone walked hurriedly. The lights on their wristbands and various electronic devices lit up. They flew and rotated in the surroundings along with their body movements. It was as if Luo Nan's consciousness was cruising within the storm of the Abyss region. The storm of the Abyss region had yet to subside. The powerful electromagnetic field that was introduced through the electromagnetic configuration had undergone a partial mutation. It mixed together with the never-ending turbulence of the Abyss region to form an extremely effective reverse interference. It interweaved with the effects of the storm of the Abyss region on the material plane. Together, they formed the source of the blackout in the CBD region. Luo Nan did not solidify his configuration in the Abyss region. It wasn't that he couldn't, it was that he didn't need to. He was different from the vast majority of ability users. He was affected by the Wraith sign. He came and went freely within the storm and turbulence of the Abyss region. Even if he broke away from absolute observation mode, the secret text of I reflected in the Abyss region would only become more powerful with the vast ocean-like accumulation of soul strength. Luo Nan was able to freely switch between absolute observation and normal mode. This experience not only gave Luo Nan secrecy and convenience, but it also gave him a free and calm control. Therefore he was able to transcend the Abyss region and set off a large-scale storm. The most technical aspect was that he was able to choose the parts that affected the Abyss region. He could freely switch between them or connect them in series or in parallel. For example, at this moment, the mysterious character, I, was reflected in the Abyss region under the support of the Wraith sign. It was completely empty, like a pedestrian that overlapped with the surrounding dark scenery. However, there were two sources of light on its body. One was the condensation ring configuration, and the other was the electromagnetic configuration. The condensation ring was the carrier for the expansion of perception, and the other formed an enormous source of interference. The two operated in parallel, forming a domain that could make one vomit blood. The condensation ring configuration, which had been tempered 1,000 times, was relatively introverted and stable. The electromagnetic configuration, which had just been condensed, was much more lively. It flew and revolved around the secret text of I. It shone with resplendent light. Every time it converged there would be a slight change. It adapted to the environment of the Abyss region and resonated with the material plane. It seemed omnipotent to control the omnipresent electromagnetic field. Luonan did not think of himself as Zeus. He did not forget that he was just a middle school student who solved problems according to established paradigms. Therefore he was generally quite calm. On the other hand, the electromagnetic configuration did not break away from the scope of formatting theory. It could still be controlled and explained by the self-format. This was something he was very pleased about. Speaking of which, during this period of time he was able to break away from the fixed pattern, and it felt even better. It was just like riding a motorcycle in the wilderness during the day. Now that he was walking on the crowded streets of the city, there was also a sense of freedom and pleasure, especially when there was a layer of darkness that he had personally created around him. This feeling was different from when he was in the wilderness. Over there he could do anything he wanted. But here he had to do something no matter what. There were people passing by him at all times. If Luonan wanted to, he could make these people dance according to his will. There was practically no difficulty at all. That should be quite interesting but also quite scary. Luonan was amused by his own thoughts. He clapped his hands and naturally received the cutting gazes of the surrounding people. Everyone, you don't have to thank me. I'm just a young man with a high moral standard. Luonan chuckled again. In any case, no one here recognized him. He wouldn't have the omnipresent location of the psychic wave network, and he wouldn't have to walk on the streets with the security arrangements of open and hidden sentries. Brother Ikuin, I love you, but you should just die from your position as a bodyguard. Live on as a sparring partner. Luonan's footsteps grew more and more agile. He hummed the guitar song that Rue went often practiced. He walked a long distance before he began to count down. 3, 2, 1. The electric current passed through millions of wires. The constrained electric and magnetic fields flipped back and forth, driving countless motors and gears. They also radiated a chaotic mess of high and low frequency bands. The light here was like the continuous notes played by a pianist's fingers. They appeared in a clear rhythm, and then they ended with a glorious chorus of accents. The buzzing of electrical appliances filled every building and every street. The background noise became clamorous, but this was the breathing sound of life in today's city. The tens of thousands of people on the streets let out sighs of relief. There were even louder cheers. Of course, there were also curses in between. But no matter what, the electricity had come. Luonan stretched his body under this piece of light. I'm done. Pack up. The transition between darkness and light brought about a new wave of chaos. Luonan threaded his way through the stream of people going back and forth. He soon turned a corner and headed down from this shopping mall to where he had placed his off-road motorcycle. It wasn't even 11 o'clock at night. He would take advantage of the night to walk another 500 kilometers of mountain roads and return to the forward operating base. If the airdrop went smoothly and the deviation was small, he would be able to make it in time for tomorrow's breakfast. Aside from nutritious soup, he would also be able to have Cat Eyes bring a portion of tofu pudding. Perfect. Luonan turned into the elevator lobby of the shopping mall. It was already quite late, and with the addition of the power outage, the flow of people at the scene of the shopping mall was quite low. Everyone didn't have the mood to continue strolling, let alone those unlucky bastards who had been trapped on the higher floors. Most people were like Luonan. They took the elevator to the parking lot and prepared to leave. Therefore, the 10 elevators in the elevator lobby were unexpectedly full for several waves in a row. He shook his head and simply left the elevator lobby. He prepared to take the fire escape route. There were many other people who had the same idea. It was bustling with activity. Luo Nan mixed into the stream of people and walked forward at a pace that was neither fast nor slow. But there was still a distance between him and the fire escape door when his eyelids blinked. Oh my, the efficiency is off the charts. On Luo Nan's sensor network, police cars were closing in on the vicinity of the off-road motorcycle that was a key marker. The special police force members didn't wait for the motorcycle to come to a complete stop before jumping off one by one to protect the technicians. They used the mentality of removing mines and explosives to surround the novice motorcycle that had only traveled 500 kilometers. Oh, that's not right. It was more like some sort of boss going on patrol. Should he snatch it back? Forget it. He didn't have any enmity with the Spring City government or the military. He had already gone a bit overboard today, so he shouldn't push their nerves any further. Luo Nan's thoughts changed and he basically said goodbye to this off-road vehicle that he had just obtained not too long ago. What awaited it was perhaps to be dismembered into 8 pieces by the analysis center and be thoroughly investigated for any and all clues. Actually, it was quite easy to drive. Luo Nan gave a sigh of grief for his own mount. He deviated from the route and walked straight out of the shopping mall. There was a slight change in his plans. Right now he needed to find an off-road vehicle. Otherwise he wouldn't have the ability to jump across the air. He would most likely break his legs if he really wanted to traverse a 500-kilometer mountain road. No matter what he wanted, he needed to have money. Luo Nan opened the virtual interface of his wristband and looked at the reserves in his personal treasury. The convenience of the intranet was not much worse than that of the secular world. However, even if it was the society's intranet, the nature of the information, the IoT, and the authority society didn't change. The major powers who controlled the resources of the network could strip away all sorts of privacy protections at any time to peek at the most core secrets. Luo Nan, a hot topic who should have been studying in Xia City, doing experiments and doing research, didn't use any means of transportation. He didn't have any travel information, but he appeared 2,000 kilometers away on the streets of Spring City in the span of a few hours. He even bought an off-road motorcycle through the society's intranet. If he really did it, the various intelligence organizations of the inner world would no longer need to worry about their bonuses for the month. Chapter 708. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. The female's sharp voice played back and forth. This special ringtone made everyone in the bar raise their eyebrows. A nightclub man had been staring at his target for a long time. He was just about to make a move when his outstretched hand froze in midair. At this time, the half-drunk woman lying on the bar raised her eyelids and raised her hand. Her wristband sensed the gesture and automatically connected. Hello? Oh, Secretary He. A voice that was extremely similar to a ringtone rang out. Because she was sleepy, the voice was a bit hoarse. It's private time right now. I've turned off the internet. Where is he? How would I know? In any case, he's not in my bed. Ruiwen? That little girl loves to play hide and seek the most. You count to 10 and then call out. Maybe she'll jump out. TSK. You're really annoying. Cat Eyes struggled to sit up from the bar and shook her head. She shook her head to get rid of the wine in front of her eyes. She grabbed the half-empty glass of wine next to her and splashed it on the face of the scheming nightclub man. Amidst a mix of panicked cries and excited screams, she supported herself on the bar and stood up. She clearly had the appearance of a drunken cat that could fall to the ground at any time, but she slapped the nightclub man, who wanted to get back at her, to the ground. Then she swayed her steps and walked out amidst gazes of astonishment, admiration, yearning, and greed. The call was already disconnected. Cat Eyes was annoyed. Why did they come to find me when they couldn't find him? Could it be that the abnormal relationship between the two of them was completely exposed? That Secretary He, if she really wanted that Luo guy, then she should learn from her and develop an abnormal relationship. Cat Eyes had similar thoughts. She was more active when she drank. Outside the bar, she felt the cool breeze of late spring. Cat Eyes was more or less completely awake. Yuan still had some bureaucratic ability to be muddle-headed. She would often turn a blind eye to Luo Nan's behavior that went beyond common sense. It could be considered indulgence, but it could also be considered respect. But once she really did go by the book, then it proved that Luo Nan had stirred up trouble. At the very least, he was highly suspicious. It had only been a few days of peace. Cat Eyes let out a long sigh of relief. Just as she was about to communicate with her boss, through the sealed system network, The other side sent back a message wave ahead of her. Speak of the devil. Emergency. Luonan's consciousness really did appear to be quite urgent. He even asked a question that Cat Eyes found to be quite high level, but it was also an extremely suspicious question. Aside from the intranet of the inner world, are there any other convenient and secretive transaction models? I'm talking about global networking, the kind that's very common. Where are you? So, she generously offered a solution. Isn't it easy to spend the money? I'll send you an app. You install it on your wristband. I don't need to say more about the security measures. You can't do anything else, but you can still use it temporarily. The other side also felt relieved. He thanked her over and over, completely lacking the demeanor of a boss. Unfortunately, there were strict and even harsh restrictions on the authority of the closed system. Such an intense contrast made it hard for the dark clouds in the bottom of Cat Eyes' heart to be blown open, scattering the radiance of delight. The wristband rang again. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. The corner of Cat Eyes' mouth twitched. In the end, she still accepted the call with a slight arc, seeing how the other side called out Sister Cat Eyes several times. I'll give you a cover. While Cat Eyes was weaving her web of lies, Luonan had just finished downloading the app through the link provided by Cat Eyes in Xia City 2,000 kilometers away. Cat Eyes reminded him that he needed to take proper security measures. Luonan was even more ruthless. He directly downloaded the app onto his external neuron, the virtual brain system. Let's see what can trick him this time. The name of the app was very straightforward. It was called Transaction. The first interface that opened after installation was a three-dimensional map of the world. Hundreds and thousands of dots of light were scattered across the map like scattered stars. They were distributed in various locations around the world. Looking carefully, Luonan discovered that these dots of light were not only located in the world's 88 large metropolitan areas, but they were also scattered throughout the vast non-urban areas. Cat Eyes didn't explain too much to him, but the novice guide built into the app was quite humane. Luonan soon realized that each of these thousands of dots of light was a hidden transaction location. The foundation of their existence was the vagabond tribes that were inharmonious with the modern metropolis civilization. They were located in every corner of the world. That's right. These transaction locations were established by vagabonds of the wilderness. They followed the migration of the vagabond tribes and moved without end. The transaction locations represented by each dot of light weren't necessarily accurate. They were constantly changing. They were reflected on the app and they weren't refreshed in real time. However, with the implementation of the Vagabond Act in recent years, large amounts of vagabonds returned to the cities. Many of the tribe's transaction locations entered the cities as well. Their existence was reasonable. Their existence was demand. These flea markets, that were completely separated from the social network of authority, had their own value to vagabonds, to ability users, and to certain people who sought convenience. They were able to survive within the cracks of policy and human relations. They had a far more stable environment than the wilderness. The app showed that there were 2 vagabond transaction locations, in Spring City alone. There was a brief description of the goods and information. Online shopping didn't exist here. Only face-to-face transactions were possible. Due to the special nature of the transaction locations, the barter model was a bit more popular. If one wanted to use credits or honor points, one would have to pay a rather heart-wrenching commission fee. Luonan first confirmed the goods and then looked at the distance. He finally chose the U-Hole market that was about 40 kilometers away from the CBD. Yep. This was the closest one. He still needed to check the bus routes. Wait a minute. If he didn't want to leave behind any traces and maintain his moral standards, then this method wouldn't do. Hiss. Luonan raised his head to look at the night sky that was once again obscured by light pollution. He suddenly felt that it would be quite good to burn off a few tens of millions. Luonan had recently been learning stealth and rapid movement techniques from Red Fox. He hadn't given up on the cultivation of the 9 orifices 6 roots technique. His physical fitness was still steadily increasing. However, running a marathon that was twice as fast as the world record was still tiring. And this was the plateau. It was already midnight in Spring City when Luonan entered the recycling stratum of Spring City while panting slightly according to the route indicated by the app. The sound of his panting was exceptionally clear in the silent and dark alleys of the building. It attracted the gazes of many people in the shadows. It was said that the 88 large metropolitan circles were all the work of copy and paste. Then the copy wasn't just the bright side. There were also the shadowy areas of the recycling stratum that the sunlight couldn't reach. Compared to the bustling business district, the recycling stratum of any city couldn't be put on the table. Even though they were only a fine line away from bustling. This evoked a few hazy memories in Luonan's mind. He had come to a similar place when he was in Xia City. Back then he was still a crow. Cough. Actually, his soul was attached to Ink's body. He and Cragburst had turned that area upside down. It was also there that he had rescued Ruewen. Speaking of which, gangsters seemed to really like the Beast faction's off-road vehicles. If someone were to jump out and yell robbery, wouldn't he be able to immediately kill them? No, snatch them back? This didn't violate basic morality. And it was much more convenient than going to some market or exchange. Luonan really did have a bit of expectation when his thoughts reached this point. But Luonan was soon disappointed. The sensor network in front of him fully displayed the surrounding geographical environment of the Yuhol market. It was different from the remains of the highway in Xia City that connected the inner and outer parts of the city. What ran through most of the lower stratum was an underground river that gradually meandered into the ground. Chapter 709. Since Luonan was unable to take shortcuts, the so-called robbery and counter-robbery became dull and uninteresting. However, there were some people hidden in the shadowy corners. They held a deep interest in a target who was walking alone in a narrow alley near midnight. There were more than one greedy gaze that roamed Luonan's body in an attempt to find traces of luxury goods. There were also some people who had purer inclinations towards happiness. It was a long night. Finding a random person to pass the time was good. Of course, there were even more people who had completely indifferent attitudes towards the people and matters in the corners of the alleys. They shut their doors and windows and went to sleep, saving energy for tomorrow's livelihood. Or they tossed and turned in their own little world. This was the recycling stratum. Low-income people, vagrants, gangs, vagabonds. In short, they were people who had yet to adapt to this society. They injected chaotic emotions and colors into this area. In terms of spectrum, it wasn't to the point of despair, but it was quite far from normal. Emotions and desires were directly visible in Luonan's eyes, but he didn't believe that comprehending the mysteries within was an easy matter. If he were to make an inappropriate analogy, it would be like an electromagnetic wave. Visible light was only a small and insignificant part of its long spectrum. There were far too many other deadly things hidden deep within the indescribable layers. Luonan was just like the brilliant sun wheel that was rolling within the abyss. Even though it was separated by an endless distance of space and time, it transmitted a tiny bit of heat. The divine ability it created made Luonan feel deep fear and reverence. Every time Luonan tried to understand it, he would always have the painful experience of drawing fire to his body. Even his body and mind would be out of balance for a few days. After a few times, his entire body was on the verge of collapse. In comparison, the ice-cold virtual brain system seemed much more amiable. In recent months, Luonan had devoted himself to the preparatory work of planning his hunt in the clouds. It had been a long time since he had taken the initiative to warm himself. Tonight he was affected by the emotional atmosphere of the recycling stratum. His telepathic thoughts drifted over and was unexpectedly scorched. His mind was a bit gloomy. He didn't have the mood to play the game of snatching and counter-snatching. He simply released a bit of mental oppression. It didn't have much lethality, but it was enough to make the brains of the people around him feel as if they were being pricked by needles. Whoever had more evil thoughts would suffer a more miserable backlash. Luonan had been roasted by the abyssal sun wheel for several months, but it wasn't as if Luonan hadn't gained anything at all. He learned these little tricks without having to learn them. Soon, a series of groans came from the darkness. The floating malice was like a mosquito that had been sprayed with medicine. It hummed and scattered in all directions. After that, the surroundings became completely quiet. Those who were able to stand guard outside the vagrant exchange knew how to behave, even if they were gangsters. With so many aptitude users entering and exiting, even if there was only 1% or 1,000 chance of conflict, it would be enough to beat this group of people into submission like dogs. Luonan was able to easily arrive at the pier that led to the Yuhol market. The main entrance. The entrance that connected the mortal world, the inner world, and the underground black market was placed in this not-so-remote location. There would certainly be some concealment. What appeared on the outside was a sealed-off factory area. It was currently in a state of desolation. Luonan didn't know what it used to be. It looked like it was riddled with holes, and even the main entrance was covered in rust. In fact, it was sealed quite tightly. It was hard to get a full view of it from the densely packed high-rise buildings in the surroundings. Luonan followed the instructions on the app and found the verification switch on the dirty main entrance. He entered the verification code, but the main entrance didn't move. Instead, a small door to the side opened. After entering the factory area, there was a wide, two-way, six-lane road in front of Luonan. It led directly to the pier. The markings on the road had long since been ground down, but the road was still smooth as a whole. It was probably a remnant of the factory's early days. Behind the main entrance were a dozen or so old electric scooters. They could be considered a means of transportation. There was quite a bit of distance between the main entrance of the factory area and the pier. Luonan didn't pay attention to them. He sized up the place with a few glances. He saw an armed robot guard that had just entered standby mode in the guard room to the side of the main entrance. Opposite the guard room was a disguise room. Well, even though the shop was quite cold and cheerless, the service was quite meticulous. Disguises and modifications were a must if Luonan wanted to achieve a perfect crime. Right now Luonan's face was smeared with Red Fox's secret color-changing ointment. He appeared quite a bit older than his actual age, but it was just a simple disguise. It was hard for others to notice any flaws in his movements that were as fast as thunder. There were certainly not enough people in a place like this where there were too many eyes. Luonan didn't hesitate. He directly entered the disguise room. The door guard room was just the entrance. The true disguise room was deep underground. It could be considered a completely different world. There were many dressing rooms arranged inside the disguise room. It looked like it could accommodate a dozen or 20 people changing their appearances at the same time. This didn't seem like a black market. It seemed more like the backstage of a small theater. Luonan was half fumbling and half looking for fun. He followed the guidance of the AI housekeeper in the disguise room and picked a dressing room to enter. He touched here and looked there. He looked at the hundreds of different disguise techniques. Many of them were fully operated by AI. They didn't require any human intervention. It could be considered an eye-opener. However, Luonan didn't play any fancy tricks according to Cat Eye's instructions. He just chose the simplest and crudest method of wearing a mask and a cloak. He spent more of his energy on another set of equipment. Aside from changing his appearance, the dressing room also had a credit exchange facility. Traders who came to the black market could exchange credit points from the secular world and honor points from the inner world for black market currency. It was said to be quite safe, but Cat Eyes didn't recommend it. This was because the exchange facility had an excellent credit system attached to it. These were Cat Eye's words. Luonan held on to his curiosity and abandoned the currency exchange function of the system interface. He chose the credit rating to the side. According to Cat Eyes, one could obtain a credit loan through this credit rating. To be more precise, it was a free startup fund for professionals. The system required the trader to display their professional skills and use their ability level to exchange for a certain amount of money. This money was purely a gift. It was anonymous and didn't need to be repaid. There were no traces to speak of. Praise the Bolu who was willing to burn money. The system interface began to display basic options. Fleshly side. Mental side. Of course Luonan chose the fleshly side. He had to disguise himself. The system clearly didn't possess the ability to distinguish between lies and lies. It easily let him pass. Next, it asked about professional skills. Luonan chose the mechanical design, processing and assembly column from the long list. He had learned the basics of engineering from worker Zhai over the past half a year. He had also learned how to assemble, modify and operate the exoskeleton platform. He also had the support of the virtual brain system. This was indeed the skill he could bring out the most in the secular world. According to worker Zhai's evaluation, being an engineer in their maintenance center was more than enough. The system seemed to place a bit more emphasis on professional skills. A new window immediately popped up after Luonan made his choice. The new window was actually a virtual work area. It displayed a perspective view of an oil pressure servo system that had been damaged by an external impact. There was even a set of virtual tools lined up next to it. Wouldn't the scale be even more terrifying when all of them were added together? Luonan really wanted to make a copy and bring it back. The disguise and credit evaluation had been completed while Luonan was sighing with emotion. Luonan looked into the mirror. Inside was a cloaked and masked man. He could tell with a single glance that the man had disguised himself. It was a crude arrangement that said, "I just don't want you to know who I am." The concealment function became more and more effective. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.